I've lived in East Tennessee for most of my life. Growing up, I'd hear old wives' tales and urban legends about strange creatures that roamed the forest. For the longest time, I thought what every other kid thought, that they were just stories told to scare kids away from dangerous places so they wouldn't fall into a ravine or get lost in the massive wilderness. I never thought any of it was more than made up stories. That's not to say I didn't spend my share of time with covers pulled tightly over my head when the wind blew branches against my window, which happened to face the woods. As I grew older, I found myself gravitating toward the stories of strange creatures in the woods. That curiosity is what led me to investigate such things in my spare time. People around here seem to be obsessed with Bigfoot, as if he's some local celebrity. They tend to ignore or downplay other cryptids. I don't know why. With the hundreds of thousands of acres of unexplored and barely explored forest, it seems there's plenty of space for anything that feels like making its home there to be left in relative peace. Me? I'm more of a fan of dogmen. Unofficially, of course. You see, once I graduated high school, my only goal was to become a park ranger. Where else could you go to work and be surrounded by such glorious nature, even at its most dangerous? There are literally dozens of stories I could tell, but the one that sticks with me is about the hikers from a couple of years ago. I remember it was early October. I always make the hike up to Clingman's Dome several times during autumn. Gazing out over the canvas of trees sprouting a myriad of colors, looking every bit like nature's fireworks show, reinforced that I had made the right career choice. I was on patrol when a call came in to go to the cabins near Fontana Lake. I got the address and headed south, crossing into North Carolina. When I got there, I was met by a woman who said her husband, son, and brother-in-law had gone to the lake fishing and hadn't come back. I got the information I needed about their general description, names, and a description of the truck and boat, then headed out to search for them. She said they were heading up to Wolf Creek. I called it in and told the station I would be driving down to Flat Branch to see if they had gone into the river there. It was a decent drive to get there, but then it was a decent drive to get pretty much anywhere out in the backwoods of the Smoky Mountains. When I got there, I found 3 trucks parked off to the side. 2 of them had empty boat trailers. I checked the description the wife had given me, and it matched one of the trucks, so I had a starting point for my search. I walked up to the water and looked both ways, hoping to luck out and find them coming in from a hard day's fishing. No such luck. There was a house nearby, so I walked over and asked if they had seen my quarry. The man said he had been out fishing himself yesterday and recalled seeing a boat like the one I described with 2 men and a boy in it. I asked him which direction they were going, and he said west. I asked if he had a boat and could take me up to Wolf Creek. The man's demeanor changed from friendly to deadly quiet. He agreed to take me across the river, but not all the way to Wolf Creek. I accepted what I could get. After a quick jog back to my truck to get my backpack, he ferried me across and quickly left. It was a mile or so to the rural campsite I suspected they had camped at. I started walking along the edge of the river, keeping an eye out for them. It wasn't long before I spotted a boat sitting on the shore. I approached the boat, and it seemed to be the right one. Everything about this missing persons report seemed like just another case of someone staying out later than planned. It was a little too easy. I would be very happy to find them sitting by a campfire about to pack up and go home. It didn't take long to hike to the campsite, but when I got there, things stopped being easy. There were only 2 tents set up, but they both looked like someone or something had torn into them. I checked inside each one and found sleeping bags and general camp equipment strewn about. I did my best not to disturb anything. When I came to the second tent, I found something more disturbing. This tent was also in disarray, but as I looked, I saw distinct drops of red. There was a notebook sitting near one of the sleeping bags. I picked it up and paged through it. October 3rd, We headed out for our annual fishing trip this morning. Mom wasn't too happy, but we told her we'd be back tomorrow. The drive to the boat launch was kind of long, but we filled the time talking about all the fish we were going to catch and generally telling stories about the area. Dad tried to scare me with a story about a cryptid that lives in the area, but I knew he was just yanking my chain. We got to the boat launch and headed out into the water without too much of a hitch. Uncle Roger nearly fell in trying to get the boat undone. He didn't find it nearly as funny as Dad and I did. Once we were out on the lake and had our lines in the water, he seemed to settle in and enjoy himself. After a few beers, he was laughing about it with us. We caught a couple of fish, but they were too small, and we had to throw them back. Dad said he'd heard about a good spot up by Wolf Creek. We had better luck when we got there. Uncle Roger caught 3 largemouth bass, and I caught 2. Dad had a big one on his line, but it got loose before we could net it. It was starting to get dark, so Dad said we should go to one of the rural campsites. We pulled the boat up to shore and tied it to a large tree, then took our gear and hiked to the campsite. There wasn't anyone else there, Rebecca, which Dad said was odd because the site is normally full. We unpacked and set up our tents, and Dad got a fire going while Uncle Roger cleaned the fish. We ate, laughed, and talked until it was dark, and we turned in for the evening. Dad said there was a better fishing spot further west, and he wanted to go there early in the morning before we headed back to the cabin. It's the middle of the night, and Dad is playing a joke on me. I woke up for some reason, and he wasn't in the tent. I could hear rustling outside, along with something pawing the ground and snorting. I knew it was Dad trying to scare me. He and Uncle Roger had been telling cryptid stories while we ate supper. I told them they weren't going to scare me like they did last year. They just looked at each other and smiled. I knew they would have something up their sleeves. I didn't bother to turn the light on or go out and check. I knew they would just run away and hide, pretending to be a creature I had scared off. Then, in the morning, they would ask each other if they had heard the commotion, hoping to scare me. I wasn't falling for it. One thing you learn from having a prankster for a dad is not to believe anything you see, or in this case, hear. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but Dad was making it tough. He was stomping and growling around so loud, trying to get my attention, but I wasn't having it. When I got up in the morning and went outside, the campsite had been destroyed. Uncle Roger asked if I had heard anything last night, and I played along, saying I'd heard some creature outside our tent but was too scared to go out and check. He made a good show of searching for Dad and seeming genuinely concerned. I was just waiting for Dad to get tired of the game and come back to the campsite. As the morning wore on, Uncle Roger started talking about going to look for him. I wanted to tell him I hadn't fallen for their little prank, but didn't want to spoil their fun. When noon rolled around and Dad wasn't back, I started to get worried. Maybe he had fallen and hit his head on a rock or something. Uncle Roger was beside himself. He told me he would have already gone looking for Dad, but didn't want to leave me alone at the camp. We decided to go look for him. Uncle Roger found what looked like a scuffle, and we headed off in that direction. He told me to stay right with him as we struggled through the forest, looking for any sign of Dad. I was starting to doubt that this was a prank. I was getting worried about Dad. The further we went, the more I realized how wrong I'd been. I wanted Dad to jump out and scare me just so I'd know he was okay. We walked around for hours searching for him, but we couldn't find him. I was beyond worried now, and I could tell Uncle Roger was too, but he didn't let on. He just kept saying Dad was probably already back at the campsite by now. When the sun started sinking low in the sky, we gave up our search and headed back. Twice we lost our way and had to double back to get to the site. There weren't many trails out here, at least not ones people had made. When we got back to the site, I ran to our tent, hoping he would be there, but he wasn't. We ate a quick supper and turned in for the night. Uncle Roger promised me he would wake me up when Dad came back. October 4th, Uncle Roger never woke me. Dad didn't come back. I said we should call for help, but he told me Dad had the only phone. We were trying to decide what to do when we heard rustling in the woods and the birds went silent. We looked around for the source of the noise, and unfortunately, we found it. There was a thing coming toward us. It stood on its hind legs, and its body made these loud cracking sounds like its bones were snapping into or out of place, echoing all around us. This thing was huge. I literally froze. My body refused to move as this horror came toward us. Uncle Roger grabbed me and yanked me over behind his tent. We tried to hide, but this thing saw us and let out a massive roar. We were so close I could see blood on its claws and teeth. I prayed it wasn't Dad's. "What do we do?" I said. He put his finger up to his lips. It looked over at us and then went into my tent, like it was searching for something. "Come on," Uncle Roger said. We snuck away from the monster as quietly as possible. We slipped down the bank of the creek and walked downstream in the water. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "There's a bridge downstream. If we're quiet enough and that thing loses our scent, we could hide under it and hope it goes away." I focused on walking as quietly as I could through the water. The sound of the creek was loud, so I was hopeful it wouldn't see or hear us. It seemed like forever until we reached the bridge. It was a small wooden bridge that spanned the creek, allowing hikers to pass over. There wasn't a lot of cover. We tried to wedge ourselves into the shadows at the furthest end of it. Time slowed to a standstill as I sat there on the uncomfortable rock, shivering. Neither of us had our jackets on, and the sun had gone down, taking the warm air with it. I started to doze when I felt a nudge. I looked up, and Uncle Roger was motioning me to be quiet. I was about to ask why when I heard the creak of a board on the bridge right above my head. It wasn't the steady wee walk of a hiker going down the trail. It was a slow, deliberate step, someone sneaking or hunting. I listened in mortal terror as the board slowly gave way to the weight of whatever was on it, one slow step at a time. As if I wasn't cold enough, my teeth began to chatter with fear. It couldn't have been very loud. Uncle Roger barely heard it, but he went into silent convulsions, motioning me to stop. I bit my tongue to keep the noise down and continued to listen, only there was nothing to listen to. Whatever was on the bridge had stopped moving. It was as if it was listening to be sure it had heard something. I strained my ears when I did. I heard sniffing. The thing was trying to catch our scent. For the first time, I noticed there was a slight breeze. It was blowing in the same direction the water flowed, but I had no idea which side of the bridge the creature was on. The wind could be our savior or our doom. Another slow footstep sounded like a bomb going off as the board creaked beneath it. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like it was moving away toward the far end of the bridge. I hoped and prayed that was the case as another footstep sounded. Then another. I breathed a silent sigh of relief as I heard it step off the edge of the bridge and onto the trail. My relief was short-lived, though, as I saw a face peek around the corner and peer under the bridge. I froze in terror as this thing that looked like a giant, monstrous dog walking on its hind legs snuck around the corner of the bridge and dipped its feet into the water. It sniffed the air and poked its snout into the shadows under the far side of the bridge. Coming up empty, it turned its focus to the side of the bridge where we were hiding. Daylight had faded to dusk. There was precious little light to see by. That was our only saving grace. The shadows were darker here, making us nearly invisible, but that was rapidly ending as the beast approached. My mind was vapor-locked. I had no clue what to do. Running would just give us away more quickly. It was looking like our only choice was to die. At that moment, I was 100% sure of what had happened to Dad. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks at the thought of my father being torn apart by this monster. As I prepared to die, I felt Uncle Roger lean over a little closer. He was right in front of me, and it was hard to see the monster. I saw his hand move down toward the ground and pick up a stone the size of his fist. I knew right away what was happening. He was trying to shield me. He would offer himself as a sacrifice to protect me. My tears redoubled, making it hard to see. The monster was almost on us. It hadn't acted like it knew we were there, but at this point it didn't matter. A few more steps and all doubt would be removed. I saw it reach out with its terrible claws that nearly touched Uncle Roger's nose. This was it. Suddenly it stopped. It lifted its head and sniffed the air. I saw the hair on its back bristle. Then in a heartbeat it disappeared. Uncle Roger slowly stood and looked around. I tried to do the same, but my legs didn't want to cooperate. I dislodged some stones as I stood, making a little noise and causing Uncle Roger to hiss at me. We stood silently, waiting for that thing to come jumping out at us from whatever hiding place it was in. After a few minutes, I began to hope that we were okay. Uncle Roger led the way back to our camp. He said we should change into dry clothes and get a little rest. It felt so good to be warm again. I snuggled up in my sleeping bag and wrote this message so that if we didn't make it, someone would know what happened. I hoped my dad was as lucky as we were. I read through the entire message, then went back and reread the description of the creature. If it was what I thought it was amazing they were still alive. Knowing what I was tracking put me on guard and made me wonder if I was being hunted right now, if it had intentionally left things as they were to ensnare another victim. I didn't have much hope of finding them, but I would look anyway. I started with the tracks in the camp, specifically the ones around the tents. It seemed like the boy and his uncle had gone toward the creek. The creature's tracks went that way too. It followed them to the creek, where its tracks seemed to wander around as if it had lost its prey. I saw where they went into the water to throw off its scent. Smart move. I followed the meandering tracks until they came to a small bridge that forded the creek. The tracks went over the bridge, then through the creek underneath it. That didn't make sense unless they were hiding in the shadows. The creature's tracks made a sudden turn and went toward the trail, then up a hill. Almost like something spooked it. If it was what I thought, I couldn't imagine anything spooking it. I followed the creature's tracks up over the hill. Then they doubled back and followed the creek from the top of the ridge. I noticed there was a good view of the creek. It didn't make sense to be going this way until I found myself back in the camp. It had put them right back in its sights. I was confused for a while. I couldn't find a second set of tracks where they left the second time. If the creature had slaughtered them at the campsite, there would be a lot more blood. But there wasn't. In fact, I couldn't find any proof they'd come back. Then it hit me. I went back and looked at the tracks again. There were a few here and there that were doubled. The boy and his uncle must have come back here after the bridge, then left the same way as before. The disturbing thing was, I still hadn't seen any tracks of the father. I circled around the camp slowly, looking for anything I might have missed. Eventually, I found a set of adult tracks leaving a tent and going to the edge of the trees. They stopped facing a tree. There was a dark spot on the bark a couple of feet up. This had the earmarks of a late-night bathroom break, but the confusing thing was the tracks never returned, like he had stopped there to relieve himself and then just disappeared. I searched all around the tree when I made a startling discovery. There were flecks of blood farther up on the bark. I circled out further from the tree and found my terrible discovery, tracks of the creature with drops of blood beside them. My marrow turned to ice at the implication. I followed my new trail, hoping I wouldn't find what my mind was telling me I would. I tried to report to the station on my radio, but strangely, all I got in response was static. I knew there are areas out here that didn't get good reception, but I didn't think this was one of them, right near a posted campsite just off a trail. I decided I would try again later. I adjusted my backpack and started off after my prey. As a precaution, I pulled out my sidearm and made sure it was loaded. It seemed like a silly thing to do, but when dealing with a dangerous alpha predator, it's best to make sure you're ready to shoot. My hand shook a little when I put my gun back in its holster. I knew this was dangerous. I knew it would be just as easy to go back to the station and let search and rescue take care of it. But I also knew that there was a man who was in the clutches of a deadly creature, and he was losing blood. I didn't have time to waste. I followed the tracks as best I could through the brush and fallen trees. I would lose the trail sometimes, only to pick it up again when I found a few more drops of blood. The tracks ran along the base of the hill, heading west until they came to a stop. It was right in front of a mountain. I looked all around, but the trail had disappeared. Finally, in desperation, I looked up and noticed a cave partway up the mountain. I thought about going up there, but was unsure. That could be the home of this creature, or it could be the home of a dozen other animals, none of which would appreciate me storming into their living room unannounced. After another thorough look around the area, I decided it was likely where my prey had gone. Clouds had been rolling in all day, and now they decided they were done playing nice. The rain began slowly enough, but was soon coming down in sheets. The cave was looking better as I covered my eyes and tried to see where I was going. It was raining so hard I couldn't see the cave anymore. I just kept pressing forward in what I hoped was a straight line, over fallen trees, through brush, and rapidly rising streams. I finally looked up and saw I was at the base of the mountain. My direction was off by a little bit, and I had ended up a few dozen yards to the right of it, but it was no matter. I started climbing the mountain, being extra careful of my footing, especially in this torrential downpour. After a few slips, including one that nearly had me tumbling off the mountain, I made it to the mouth of the cave. I slipped inside and enjoyed a moment without water dumping on me. I looked down, and the water dripping off of me made a little puddle, like I had brought my own rain cloud into the cave with me. I shook off as much water as I could as quietly as possible. The rain pouring down outside made loud splashes inside the cave. It would have been difficult to hear anything else, but I still wanted to be sure. I buckled and set the backpack down just inside the mouth of the cave. The rain had made it gain extra weight, and I didn't know if I would have to move fast. I opened my pack and got out my bottle of water and drank. It had been a while since I had drunk anything, and I chugged half of it down. I closed it and saved the other half in case I got out of here alive. With that happy thought rattling around in my brain, I stowed the water bottle back in my pack and pulled out a small flashlight. I turned it on while pointing it at the floor. The bright beam illuminated the cave. It was large as caves go. I could stand up in it and not reach the ceiling. There were many boulders and stones. It wasn't a smooth floor. The walls were rough. There weren't any cave drawings in here. I walked slowly. Each step felt like I was closer to my doom. I pulled out my gun and held it tightly, the sense of foreboding thick in the air. Two thoughts impressed themselves on me. Firing a gun in here would probably deafen me, and the stench was horrific. It smelled like an open sewer in the middle of August. As I crept deeper into the cave, the sounds of the rain diminished, replaced by an eerie silence. I could hear the steps of my feet, my breathing, and my heart pounding. I was seriously considering turning around and leaving when I saw something ahead of me move. It was big, at least as big as me. I dove against the wall for some cover, forgetting that I was holding a bright light in my hand, so it didn't matter if I tried to hide as long as the light was on. I pointed it at the floor but didn't turn it off. I heard a shuffling sound getting closer. I was tempted to turn off the light, but giving the edge to this creature was not a good idea. It already had the home field advantage. I heard it sniffing, but I couldn't see it yet. I decided to find out more by bringing my light up and shining it deeper into the cave. I got the shock of my life when my light landed on the creature, and it was only a few steps away. It was big, at least 6 feet tall, and looked like a dog with a long snout, only its body seemed elongated. It stood on its hind legs and had hands attached to muscular arms. Overall, it looked like a nightmare. Part two, it recoiled from the light and let out a growl. It was all I could do to keep from soiling myself. Without thinking, I pointed my gun and fired. The sound was deafening. My ears instantly started ringing. The creature roared at me, then turned and ran deeper into the cave. It had roared a mere few feet from me, yet I barely heard it. I stumbled and had to take a minute to steady myself. Then I started following it deeper into the cave. To this day, I really don't know why, other than needing to know if the hiker was alive. I looked at the ground to see if there was any blood, but there wasn't. I must have just startled it with the shot. That wasn't great news. I'd hoped I would have hit it and that it was wounded. Just scared meant it would be ready to fight when I saw it again. After all, I'm sure to the creature I was the invader, and it was defending its home. I continued farther into the cave, shining my light and watching for any sudden movement. I had no idea where it was or if it was setting a trap for me. I felt a whiff of air and jumped back a split second before the claws sliced the air where my face would have been. I rolled and came up shooting, holding my light beside the gun to illuminate my target. I fired over and over, pointing and shooting without having the time to aim. I watched as it ducked every shot and ran with inhuman speed. Just before it disappeared from sight, I saw it skip a step as I fired my last shot. My hopes soared that I had hit it at least once. I ejected the magazine and put a fresh one in, reminding myself that I only had one more and chastising myself for not being more careful with my limited ammo. I justified it by telling myself there's no use dying with a full magazine. I followed once again, nearly jumping for joy when I came to the spot where it had disappeared and saw a spot of fresh blood on the ground. I was hoping for more, but as I went, the drops were every few feet. Even though it didn't seem like much, at the speed it was running, I was sure it had sprung a major leak. I followed the trail deeper into the cave. There was a chill in the air that made me shudder. My mind told me it felt like a tomb, my tomb. I shook off those thoughts and continued until the blood stopped. I shone my light on the small puddle and the ground beyond where there was no blood. My mind screamed at me that it was a trap. I shone my light all around, even on the ceiling, but I couldn't see it. I started backing out the same way I'd come in, my eyes darting all around in search of my prey. It hit me like a bulldozer going 60 miles an hour. It had come out of nowhere and rammed me in the back. I sprawled out on the floor, rolling to a stop. My flashlight lay a few feet away, and I had no idea where the gun was. The wind was knocked out of me. I tried to breathe, but couldn't. I just lay there gasping for air. It slowly circled around me, growling and bristling. I knew it was going for the kill. I screamed at my brain to move, but my body refused to cooperate. I tried to focus on my breathing and regain mobility. As it circled closer, I could see its breath chugging out of its mouth like a steam engine. I knew it was time. My arm was the first to recover. I slowly moved it toward the flashlight. It stopped circling just as I got a grip on the light. I saw the creature hunching to lunge at me. I clicked the light to strobe and aimed it at the creature's face. It screamed and clawed at the air as if it could fight off the light. I rose to my knees, keeping the light on it. When it turned away, I shone it around, desperately searching for my gun. I found it a few yards away and tried to run for it, but my body hadn't fully recovered, and I fell flat on my face. My life in the balance, I didn't bother with the pain of my freshly broken nose. I crawled toward the gun with every ounce of energy in me. It seemed like an eternity until I put my hand on the grip and brought it to bear on the creature. It had recovered and was running at me full speed. I shone the strobe at it again, and it veered away from the light. I stood and aimed at it, squeezing the trigger. I saw the satisfying impact of the bullet in its side, and squeezed the trigger again, making another hole on the far side of its chest. I squeezed over and over, hitting it each time and watching it reel from the impact, but it stayed on its feet. It growled and charged as my slide locked back, showing an empty chamber. I shone the strobe in its eyes once more, but this time it just ran off to the other side of the room. I used the distraction to eject my magazine and load in the last full one. I released the slide and started firing immediately, hitting it in the hindquarter and leg, but not stopping it. I stopped shooting and forced myself to concentrate. I aimed carefully as it ran toward me, and at the right moment, I squeezed the trigger. It went down hard, squealing like a stuck pig. It thrashed and clawed at its face, tumbling over itself. Blood flew everywhere from its many gunshot wounds, but it still continued flailing about and squealing in pain. After a few minutes of this, it finally settled down and was still enough for me to see my handiwork. I had shot it in the eye. There was nothing left there but a bloody hole. I didn't dare approach it. I stood at a respectful distance and watched, my gun ready if it tried to make a move. Its squeals became moans, finally turning into a heavy sigh, and then it was still. I shone the light on it, feeling cautiously optimistic that this thing was no longer a threat. Then I remembered what I was doing here in the first place. I tried to get my bearings and proceeded further into the cave. My main thought was not only finding the hiker alive, but also hoping and praying there wasn't another one of those creatures here. I didn't have another fight like that in me. The path curved downward until it came to a large open area. I shone the light around, looking for anything. Off in the far corner, there was a flash of red as I panned through. I approached it cautiously and found it was a jacket. Inside the jacket was a piece of meat that used to be a human being. His throat had been ripped out and his legs were gone. All that was left of them were some bones. The thing must have been working its way up, saving the arms and torso for later. The man's face was a frozen scream. I can't even imagine the horror of being dragged away from your loved ones only to be murdered and eaten in some cold, dark cave. I wasn't even sure if he was dead when the thing ripped his legs off. I had to stop focusing on such things and decide what to do. If I left the remains here, there was no doubt some other animal would come by and finish off what the creature had started. I needed to try to get him to his family for closure and a proper burial. I bent down, trying to figure out how to carry him. A fireman's carry was out. There were no legs for counterbalance. In the end, I picked him up by his arms and flung them over my shoulder, holding on to them and turning his body into some macabre backpack. I started back out of the cave, hoping I'd be able to carry him all the way back to the campsite and finally back to my truck. As I trudged back through the cave, I came to the section where our fight had taken place. Shell casings and blood were strewn about the ground. I wondered to myself how I had avoided getting hit by a stray ricochet. When I looked over to where the creature lay, only it wasn't there. I shone my light all around frantically, whipping around, but it was gone. I found the spot where it had lain still, where I thought it had died. There was a large pool of blood there, but no body. I pulled my gun out of my holster, ejected the magazine, and checked to see how many rounds I had left. There were only 2. I hoped wherever that thing was, it was no longer in the mood for hunting or revenge. In the end, I decided there was nothing I could do. If the thing attacked me, I was defenseless, carrying literal dead weight on my back. I holstered the gun and hitched up my human backpack, then shone the light toward the mouth of the cave and kept walking. My hearing was just starting to return to normal, although I was sure I would have some permanent hearing loss. I could hear the shuffling of my feet as I staggered toward the cave opening. When I got there, I found a world transformed. Daylight was just starting to peek its way around the dark. However, the rain had created a massive fog bank. I couldn't see anything down in the valley I'd come from. It was a sea of fog. Only the peaks of the mountains escaped its suffocating blanket. I looked over and saw my backpack patiently waiting for my return. I lay my burden down and got the water bottle out, glad that I had saved the last drink for now. As I sat on the edge of the cave precipice, I looked down and wondered how I was going to get the body down there without falling to my own death. For an instant, I was tempted to throw it down and find it at the bottom once I climbed down. But I thought this fellow had been through enough and didn't need the indignity of becoming a human frisbee. I dug through my backpack and found some bungee cords. I bungeed him to my back and carefully started my descent, leaving my faithful backpack to watch me desert it. I wished I could take it with me, but there was no way I could carry both. As I climbed down, there were a few times I lost footing and nearly took the short and deadly route down. Fortunately, I made it to the bottom in one piece. Instead of celebrating, though, I discovered a new problem. The fog was so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I had no idea how I was going to find my way out of there. I decided to go straight away from the mountain and hope the fog cleared as I went. The rain had turned the forest into a marshland. The ground was soft, and the streams had overgrown their banks. I found myself wading through knee-deep water on more than one occasion as I trudged along, hoping I had enough energy to get back without collapsing from exhaustion. Two thoughts chased each other around my mind. Where were the other hikers, and where was the creature? I hadn't seen any other remains in the cave. If it had killed them, it hadn't had time to take them back to the cave yet. Perhaps my pursuit had forced it to retreat before it could retrieve its other bounty. I had kept my ears open for any sounds of it following me. The most disconcerting thing was the lack of forest noises. The animals and birds were strangely silent. Usually that meant there was a predator nearby. In this ungodly fog, perhaps they were just sleeping, waiting for it to clear. That sounded good. It gave me the false illusion that I wasn't in mortal danger from a wounded alpha predator bent on revenge. But I couldn't focus on that, or worry would drain my resolve to get us both out of there. I took a break from trudging and tried to get my bearings. I checked my watch. I had been walking for over an hour. It was late morning, and the sun should have been high in the sky, but the oppressive fog continued to smother it. I looked around, but there was nothing to see except the dingy gray curtain of hopelessness. I was about to collapse and give up when I heard it, the faint sound of hope. I could hear the creek running. As hope rose, it was suddenly dashed. I heard the sound of a footstep behind me. I whipped around so fast that my macabre backpack nearly made me lose my balance. I couldn't see anything through the fog, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. With a renewed surge of determination, along with a strong desire to elude whatever was pursuing me, I set out toward the sound of the creek. My pace was still slow, but fearing for my life was a great motivator. I had no doubt whatsoever that the footsteps behind me belonged to the creature bent on revenge. After what seemed like an eternity, I gazed at the most awe-inspiring sight I'd seen all day, Wolf Creek and all its 6-foot-wide, overflowing banks of glory. I followed it until I came across Lakeshore Trail, and the journey became much easier. The fog was even beginning to lift, which was both a blessing and a curse. I could finally see far enough behind me to confirm that the creature was indeed following me. I had wondered the entire time why it hadn't overtaken me, but now that I caught sight of it, I understood. It was grotesque. It looked like it came straight from hell. Its one eye socket was leaking gore, and the many bullet wounds covering its body seeped blood. There were places where I could see internal organs trying to escape, and its right leg had a bullet wound that caused it to limp severely. As I watched, I wondered how it had made it this far. But then I looked into its remaining eye and saw the intense rage burning within. I knew I would die a horribly grotesque death if I slowed enough for it to catch up. We continued this slow, grim pursuit until I reached the banks where Wolf Creek opened up into the lake. My energy was nearly gone. At one point, I considered dropping my human backpack in hopes that the creature would feed on it instead of me, but then I would have failed. I came here to find this hiker and bring him back. The thought lit a fire deep within me. I came to the edge of the lake with the creature a mere few yards behind me. I glanced around, hoping to see a boat I could flag down, but no such luck. With no other choice, I waded into the water. It was cold, but instead of refreshing me, it chilled me and sapped what little strength I had left. The creature entered the water behind me and seemed to be gaining on me. It got deeper to the point where I was no longer able to walk and had to start swimming. The far side of the lake looked like it was miles away, even though I knew it was much less than that. I swam for all I was worth, knowing at any moment I could be pulled under by the creature. My passenger, strapped to my back, wasn't helping either, the literal definition of dead weight. Every minute I had to fight off the urge to dump him. When I finally reached the other side, I was exhausted. I lay there on the shore, waiting for the creature to disembowel me, but unable to move to defend myself in any way. With great effort, I turned to look back and see when my doom would come. To my great surprise, I saw it staring at me from the far beach. I guessed it couldn't swim. I chuckled to myself as I lay there, gathering strength for the continued journey back to the truck. Eventually, I got there. As I opened the door, for a fleeting moment, I considered putting the hiker in the passenger seat. But then I looked at the wet, gore-soaked torso and reconsidered, gently laying him in the truck bed. The drive back was long, and I continually had to shake myself to stay awake. But eventually I made it to the cabin. I stumbled up to the door and knocked once. "Oh my God," the woman said when she saw me. "Are you all right?" I hung my head. "No, but I will be after about 3 days of sleep. Unfortunately, I have bad news for you. I found your husband, but not your son or brother-in-law." A man and a boy came out of the cabin and stared at me. I instantly knew who they were and grabbed them both in a huge hug. "I'm so glad you made it out," I said, fighting back tears. Thanks," the man said, pulling out of my hug. "Who are you again?" "He's the ranger that came to look for all three of you," the woman said. "I don't understand. Your tracks were confusing," I said. "I followed them down to the bridge, but then they went back up to the campsite." "We got some rest," the boy said. "Then Uncle Roger came and said we were going. We left everything and slipped away to the boat, rowed across the river, and left." I smiled. "I'm very glad you did." He looked at me with expectant eyes. "You said you found my dad?" My face fell. "I did, but it was too late." "So he's—" I nodded solemnly. "Where is he?" "He's in my truck, but you don't want to see that." Before I could say another word, he ran to the truck and looked in the passenger seat. A look of confusion fell over his eyes when he saw no one there. Then he slowly looked toward the bed of the truck. He stepped back and peered over the side. He instantly dissolved into tears and slid down the side of the truck, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," I said to the woman and the man. She grabbed me and gave me a hug. "Don't be," she said. "Without you, we wouldn't have known for weeks to months, maybe even years, what had happened. We would have gone on looking with false hope. You've given us a chance for closure and to properly grieve." She released me, and I wiped my eyes. I looked at the man and walked down to the truck. He followed, and we gently removed the body and laid him on the couch, then covered him with a blanket. The boy followed us back to the cabin, but wouldn't look at me or anyone else. He sat in a chair and stared at the blanket covering his father's body. I knew I had done all I could, so I excused myself and started toward the door. I paused and said to the boy, "I promise I'll make sure that thing never hurts anyone again." He looked up at me, eyes full of tears, and said, "How will that help my dad?" His mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand to silence her. I knew the boy was just hurting. I left without another word. On the drive back, I called the station and told them everything that had happened, then told them I was going home and calling off for the following day. After getting home, stumbling into a shower, and collapsing in bed, there was only one thought on my mind. I would return to Wolf Creek very soon with more and bigger guns. I would end that monster if it was the last thing I did. But that is another story. Thanks for listening, Horror Cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time. I'm a park ranger, but I'm leaving my name and the name of the park out of this post intentionally. The names of all those involved have been changed as well. I needed to get this story out there, but cannot rely on conventional avenues, so that's why I'm posting it here. I could lose my job or much worse, but this story has to be told. I owe it to Catherine. My ride at the ranger station began like any other day. I was given my section of the park to patrol. Unfortunately, the park is massive, and my section usually includes about half of it, so there isn't much chance for leisurely strolls on the trails. I hopped in my work vehicle, a 10-year-old 4x4, and headed out to see if anybody needed assistance. It didn't take long to find someone. At the first campground, there was a man who couldn't get his camper started. A quick jump got him up and rolling. Next was a couple needing directions, then an overturned canoe. I had only made it a few miles through the park. I was going to have to move faster if I hoped to make a full round today. I managed to grab a few quick bites of lunch and put some miles behind me without anyone needing help when the call came over the radio. A hiker had found something, and I needed to check it out. A half hour later, I was talking to a middle-aged woman who had made a concerning discovery. She had found a hat and a note on the trail. I read the note. I'm writing this note and leaving it behind because I'm not sure what's happening. The 5 of us friends have been planning this trip for forever, ever since long before we graduated, but something always seemed to come up at the last minute, and one or more of us couldn't go. For a while, I was almost convinced that some outside force was working against us, that we were cursed to never go camping together until we were all too old to enjoy it. I could picture Devin now. He would still go even if he was so old that he had to use a walker on the trail. He's always up for camping. I think the guy carries a loaded backpack in his car everywhere he goes. Adrian got here right behind us, followed soon after by Dean. Of course, Terry was the last one to show. We started up the trail in great spirits. 3 miles in, the sun was just starting to heat up. We were making good time toward the rusted campground when Devin decided to take a detour. He said he had heard about an old trail that no one used anymore and wanted to check it out. I said that we should just keep going the way we were, but I was outvoted. Honestly, I don't think Terry's vote should have counted since he was obviously stoned, and Dean just bullied him into saying yes. We came to a spot with a large stone off to the side of the trail. Devin said that it was the trailhead, but I didn't see any trail. He led us through some heavy brush, but on the other side, it cleared out, and we could see the faint impression of an overgrown path. I went last and left my hat on the stone in case we got lost and needed to be rescued. I think that's exactly where we're heading, straight toward Lost. I'll leave this note under my hat and hope that somebody finds it. I asked the woman to show me where she had found it, and she did. 3 miles later, I was staring at the rock that I had hoped I would never see again. I radioed my location to the station and told them that if they didn't hear from me in a couple of hours, they should send a search party to the old abandoned trail. I wished I had brought my supplies, my backpack, and my sidearm, but they were 3 miles away, and I didn't know how long these kids had been on this trail. I knew that wasted time could mean the difference between life and death. At least I had my knife, a flashlight, and binoculars. The woman placed the red hat back on the stone just in case and headed back while I pushed into the heavy brush. Once through the initial overgrowth, the trail became visible. Old memories flashed through my head, ones that I never wanted to think of again. I took a deep breath and headed down the trail. It was overgrown for the first mile or so, and then it opened up into a field. I could see people had walked through before me by the way the weeds were partially trampled. As I walked through, a deer jumped ahead of me, startling me. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how jumpy I was. I tried to settle down, reminding myself that these kids were just lost and that I could catch up to them and get them out. But telling myself that didn't make the memories go away. I entered a clearing with a fallen log and another note with a rock sitting on it. Okay, I think I'm being silly. This trail isn't so bad. Maybe I was wrong. Devin seems to know where he's going. I just can't shake this feeling that we're being watched. Sometimes I'll look around and I swear I see a face disappear behind a tree. Am I being paranoid? Maybe if the birds would start singing again, that would lighten my mood. But I haven't heard a bird or any other animal for a while. I wonder why they're being so quiet. Are they afraid of us? On another note, Terry seems to be brooding more than usual. Maybe he forgot to bring enough of his stash to last the trip. Devon is in his glory since everybody has to rely on him for directions. Adrian and Dean seem to be along for the ride, although I have noticed Dean looking around at the trees as well. Maybe I'll ask him if he sees anything. If you're trying to track us down, I hope we aren't being too much of a bother. I just have this feeling. I folded the note and stuck it in my pocket, then prayed that she was wrong about being followed. I pushed on, beginning to miss my backpack with these supplies in it, especially the water bottles. The trees provided some shade, so the sunlight wasn't shining directly on me, but hiking is always thirsty work. The birds chirping in the trees made me almost forget about the desperate mission I was on to save these 5 kids. My mind wandered back to the kid that I couldn't save. It had been shortly after I started as a park ranger. An 11-year-old boy had gotten lost on this very trail. His parents searched frantically for him before calling us to look. I remember hoping to be the one to find him as we formed search parties and searched in and around every inch of the trail. In the end, I got my wish. I found him, but I wish I hadn't. I pushed the memory to the back of my mind and focused on the trail. It was starting to fade. The trampling of feet wasn't making enough of a difference, and I was starting to lose my way. Out here, that can be deadly. I kept moving forward and finally regained the trail just in time to reach the fork. I looked back and forth from one choice to the other and couldn't see a difference between the two. I searched for any broken twigs or plants that would give me a hint, but there were none. Just when I was about to give up and flip a coin, I saw a piece of paper in the weeds, barely visible. I dug it out and read it. Okay, it seems like we have a dilemma, a fork in the road, as it were. You would think that I would be happy to see the doubt in his eyes as he looked from one choice to the other, but you'd be wrong. It made my confidence plummet. It made me think that we were never getting out of here. Everyone's running out of water. Devin yelled at us for not conserving, but I saw him drink the last of his too. He ranted and raved at us for a while, but we all knew that he was just mad because he didn't know what to do. In the end, he flipped a coin and we all did our best not to laugh. Adrian is reaching the end of a rope with Devin in his attitude. Dean has been playing peacemaker, trying to keep them from going at it too much. Terry has been way too quiet. I haven't seen him light up once. Something's up with him, but every time I ask, he says that it's nothing. The birds still aren't singing, and it's starting to really bother me. The strange feeling that I have hasn't gone away. I asked Dean if he had seen anything strange, but he won't talk about it. We've been on this trail for a while. I'm hoping to come to the end soon. By the way, in case the note got moved or blown around, we took the left trail. I was panicked by the end of reading that note and so relieved she mentioned which trail to take. I radioed in and reported that I was on the trail of the missing hikers. I mentioned the fork and taking the left side. I was told that there was no search party going on yet and that I was the only one looking for these kids. It was the complete opposite of years ago, looking for that kid. Everyone was searching. I know that we combed every inch of that wilderness, but that's the thing about the woods. You can search every nook and cranny, but something can still stay hidden. The sun was going down, and I still had no idea how close I was to catching up to these kids. I could stumble across them in the next clearing, or they could be hours ahead of me. I met with the woman who showed me the hat and the note in the afternoon. If they started out around daybreak, they could be a good 5 or 6 hours ahead of me. If the leader is so driven to continue, it's hard to say how far they might be. I continued following the trail until I came to a fallen tree across the river. I looked both ways along the edge of the water but saw no trail, so I made my way across the tree. I could picture the debate the kids had when they got here. I chuckled at the thought of Devin having to convince them to go across. I believe I made up a lot of time with that single crossing. I jumped down to the water and drank my fill, then climbed back up feeling much better. It was tough to pick up the trail on the other side, so I was glad to find a knot stick into a branch. Oh my gosh, Devin just about came unglued when he got to that tree over the river. He hopped up on it right away and started across, but the rest of us weren't so sure that the trail led that way. We asked him how the trail could be planned with a fallen tree as a part of it. He sputtered and stopped and told us how lost we'd be without him. Dean finally had enough and told him that we were lost because of him. I seriously thought that Devin was going to take a swing at him until Terry, of all people, came to his side and told Devin to shut up. The rest of us all came together and told Devin that he could keep leading us as long as he stopped acting like a petty tyrant. Well, he didn't take that well. In the end, he told us that we could all go to heck. He sat on the log and refused to move. Eventually, after we took a break and refilled our water bottles in the river, Dean said that we should get going and let us across the tree. Devin followed along, acting like a whipped puppy. Dean and I talked about the disappearing face that we had seen a while back, but neither of us had seen it again. At least the birds were back to singing now. I chuckled, figuring that Devin would be a big baby over the whole thing, but after the chuckle came concern. Despotic leaders are usually dangerous, and I wondered how much offense Devin had taken, and if he would be looking to get some payback in some small or large way. Darkness was coming on fast in the woods, so I had to make a decision: camp for the night or keep going. If I camped, I could defend against the predators that lurk in the darkness, but if I kept moving, there would be a good chance that I could stumble across the group before daybreak. It wasn't much of a decision. These kids that I didn't even know had plunged headfirst into the woods without even my backpack of supplies. Of course, I was going to try to catch up with them. If I had done that years back, would that kid still be alive? Such thoughts nagged me most days. I kept them at bay. But here, in the same forest close to these spots where I found him, I needed to focus. If I'm going to keep after them, I need to get going. I stepped off the trail to go to the bathroom, and I heard a metallic snap. At the same time, I felt an intense pain shoot up my leg. I looked down, and yep, I had stepped into a bear trap. I screamed and fell to the ground, rocking back and forth in agony. After a few minutes, I focused on getting the trap off my leg. I found a branch and pried the trap open, screaming the entire time. I managed to pull the trap off my leg and threw it to the side. I really didn't want to take my boot off, but I did to see the damage. It took every ounce of effort that I could muster to unlace the boot and pull it off. My leg was purple. I felt along the wound very gently, but there didn't seem to be any break. That didn't mean that I wasn't going to be limping for the next month, though. But it did mean that I would buy this brand of boots for the rest of my life. It took much more effort and some more screaming to put the boot back on, but I knew that I needed to keep moving. I laced up the boot and found a sturdy branch to use as a crutch. I struggled to my feet and took my first few ginger steps. Once I got into a rhythm, it got easier, but I couldn't walk as fast as I had been. Of course, when I was at my weakest is when I heard footsteps in the trees close to me. I knew there was a predator around, just because it could sense that I was vulnerable. I leaned against a tree and held my crutch ready as a weapon. The footsteps came closer. They paused as if they knew that I was ready, and then they slowly continued stalking me. They were deliberate but slow. Each step seemed measured, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. I heard it right next to the tree that I was hiding behind. I whipped around as best as I could and raised my crutch to strike. A deer stared at me for a heartbeat, then turned and ran through the forest. I collapsed against the tree and slid down to the ground, allowing the adrenaline to bleed off. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke to sandpaper scraping the side of my face. I opened my eyes and there was a bear beside me, licking my cheek. I freaked out, screamed, and rolled away from it. The bear wasn't ready for that reaction, so it startled and ran away. I slowed my rapid breathing and looked around. It was dark, and there were thin shafts of moonlight beaming through the trees, providing a little light. I checked my watch, and it was nearly 4 a.m. I rose slowly and gingerly on my injured ankle, took the small flashlight out of my pocket, and prayed that it still worked. My prayers were answered when the beam shone brightly through the woods. I panned around slowly, trying to get my bearings. After a moment, I found the trail and started hobbling toward it. The nightly noises were a comfort. At least, if the crickets were chirping and the rest of the forest was singing its nightly tune, then predators weren't around. I stumbled and fell, hitting my injured ankle against a rock. The pain overwhelmed me, and I screamed. After a few minutes of recovery, I got up and continued at a slower pace, paying more attention to the ground. I chastised myself for falling asleep and losing so much time. At least the trail was easy to follow. I continued on through the night, hoping that I wasn't too late. I started thinking about the boy that I had failed to rescue and what would happen if I failed to rescue these kids. I'm sure the Rangers Department would say that I did my best. I wasn't worried about them. It was me. Would I be able to forgive myself for letting something happen again? My thoughts were interrupted when I stumbled into a clearing. Not just any clearing. There were the remnants of a fire. There were impressions from tent pegs being pulled out of the ground, and all around were these signs of a very recent campsite, including a tent that was still set up. I got so excited that I nearly fell over my crutch, looking around for signs of anything. The tent was a mixed blessing. It was very ominous that it was still here, while the others were gone, but I was able to find some supplies to take along for my search. The most important was food. I shoved some protein bars in my pocket while devouring some beef jerky. I also grabbed 2 bottles of water from the pack. I stumbled across the note sitting under a rock beside the smoldering fire. Before I sat, I held my hand out to the fire. It was still warm, but the embers were nearly dead. It had been hours since it was first lit. If I hadn't taken my unintentional nap, I would have caught up with them. There was nothing I could do but sit by the dying fire and read the note, hoping there was good news. We found this clearing and decided to camp. Everyone was tired from walking, and the mood was sober because no one seemed to know where we were. All of us had been hiking in this forest before, but none of us had ever seen or heard of this trail. We set up our tents, started a fire, and then had some supper. We sat around. No one really felt like talking, so I tried to get the ball rolling by asking Terry why he was late. He hesitated, but, at my prompting, eventually told us that he had hit an animal with his car on the way here. I asked if it was a deer, and he said no. It was way too big to be a deer. He said that it walked upright on 2 legs and that it was massive, like 8 feet tall, covered in brown hair. He had swerved to miss it, but the strangest thing was that it seemed to try to jump in front of him anyway, like it wanted him to stop. We all listened with rapt attention. Just then, off in the distance, we heard a scream. We all froze. Devin started spouting off and yelling at Terry for trying to scare us, and then he stormed off. Dean tried to stop him, but he pushed him away and disappeared into the woods. The rest of us talked, trying to decide if we should go look for him, but in the end, we figured that we should just let him go and cool off. A short while later, we heard a rustling off in the distance and a muffled cry. We huddled a little closer together and went on high alert. Our eyes darted back and forth as we searched the impenetrable wall of trees surrounding us, looking for any sign of a predator. Right then, the strangest thing happened. All the nightly noises stopped. The crickets, the squirrels, the owls, every sound that you usually hear in the forest at night simply ceased. It was unnerving. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone deaf. Our eyes darted all around us in the darkness. We huddled closer to the fire. Dean pulled out his hunting knife. None of us said a word. It was like if we spoke, something bad would happen. Somehow, whatever caused the noises to stop would find us if we spoke. Someone did speak, though, just not who we expected. "Why are you here?" came a raspy and deep voice that seemed to echo from everywhere. We looked all around, and finally, a man stepped into the light. He was large, well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. He was also wearing a park ranger's uniform. It looked old and shabby, like he had been wearing it for a long time. There were no name tags or park patches either. At that point, we didn't care. We had been rescued. We clamored around him saying how glad we were that he had found us. We told him about going on the trail and how we weren't sure where we even were. The man listened and then slowly said, "You shouldn't be here." We all looked at each other, and I'm sure the others thought the same as me. No crap, we shouldn't be here. We just told you that. He continued to look at us from one to the other as though sizing us up. I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with the silence. I would have thought that he would offer to guide us, but he didn't. He kept staring. I think everyone else was getting a little edgy as well when Dean asked if he could point us in the right direction. He looked at Dean as if deciding whether to answer him or not. "I can guide you," he said, "but first you should have some rest." We all agreed that the day had been long and stressful, and we decided to take his advice and turn in. We offered him some food and water, but he refused, saying that he wasn't hungry. We each went to our tents, and we laid down. Before I settled in, I finished this note. I poked my head back out of my tent to check on our guide. He was sitting by the fire, staring into the orange coals. I thought that I heard him mumbling or maybe humming something softly. I quietly zipped up my tent and went to sleep. Sometime later, somebody banged on my tent. I woke and unzipped it to find the ranger with a strange look in his eyes. "We need to go." "Why?" I said, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. "It's not safe here," he said with an edge of panic in his voice. I popped back into my tent to change that and then came out and met with everyone. They were all in states of semi-consciousness as well. Everyone but the ranger seemed to be confused. "Pack it up, we need to leave," he said a little more forcefully. I was about to protest when I heard a piercing scream in the distance. His head shot up and he stared in the direction of the sound. "Move it," he said. "Pack up." We didn't need to be told again. The scream brought us all fully awake. We tore down our tents in record time and packed everything into our backpacks. As I was finishing up, I noticed that Devon's tent was still up. "Where's Devon?" I said. "Who's Devon?" the ranger said. "He's another one of our friends. He went off into the woods alone right before you got here." "He didn't come back," the ranger said. "Well, should we go look for him?" The ranger extended his arms and did a slow circle. "Which way would you go?" he said. I understood his point. How would we know where he had gone if he was still on the path or not? It just seemed like we should do something. "What about his gear?" I said. "Do we take it with us?" The ranger looked at me like he was annoyed at having to answer such questions. "No, leave it here in case he comes back," he said. "He'll need his supplies." I'm not sure if I'll keep leaving notes or not now that we have the ranger to guide us. Whoever finds this, please look for Devon and make sure that he's okay. All the rangers at this park are in their 30s or 40s maybe. It was someone who retired and was just roaming around out there. But why would he be in a ranger outfit? I'm sitting here by the dying embers of the fire with a tent set up in front of me. It was very tempting to take a rest. If there were a capable ranger, I could get some rest before the long hike back out of here. But I knew that I had already taken my rest for the night. If not for that, I would have been here hours ago, probably before the other ranger. I set out again, feeling tired but determined. The campsite made me more hopeful than I had been all day. At least they were together and thinking like campers. If only I knew who this ranger was. The sun was an hour away from rising, so I took out my flashlight to follow the trail. I zipped up the tent before I left. Just in case its owner did come back, I wouldn't want animals getting in and taking everything. It's bad enough when injured park rangers do it. The trail stayed level for a while. As dawn peeped over the trees, the trail started heading upward, which was bad news for me and my bum ankle. It made things harder, but I had my trusty makeshift crutch to help me. Dawn crept into the forest, giving me a little assistance. At least I wouldn't have to waste a hand holding a flashlight. As the climb grew steeper, the trail grew more narrow. At times, it was only the width of 1 foot. I held on to trees and whatever I could as I scaled the extremely narrow trail. At the most difficult, I paused and seriously considered turning back. As I looked around for any other way to keep going, I saw a brightly colored fabric at the bottom of the ravine. I carefully balanced as I took out my binoculars and looked. It was a backpack, and attached to it was the body of a girl in her early 20s. She looked like she had hit her head on the rocks at the bottom. Her face had not looked much better. Her clothes were ripped and soaked in red. There was no doubt that an animal had gotten to her. The only question was she alive when it had started feeding on her? I looked away, but felt my determination double. I had to find these missing kids. They might be with the ranger, but they were still in terrible danger. I slowly continued up the narrow trail. At times, I was sure the ground would give out from under me and that I would share the same fate as the poor unfortunate girl at the bottom of the ravine. It was then that I remembered my radio. I tried to call in and report the location of the body, but the only response that I got was static. I determined to try again when I got to the top of the trail. It was yet another motivation to keep going, to be careful, and to survive. It seemed like hours at a snail's pace, working my way up the side of that ravine. Finally, I clawed my way over the edge to the top. I rolled over on the solid ground and lay there for a few minutes. Once I caught my breath, I got up slowly and painfully. I hadn't done my ankle any favors. I limped toward what looked like the trail and began following it. It wasn't long before I came across the remnants of another campsite. The fire was a little warmer than the last one. I stoked it up, threw some more wood on, and got it going. I knew that I needed some rest. I searched around and found a note and then sat down on a log by the fire to read it. I can't believe Adrienne's gone. We had started up the steep ravine and the trail kept getting more narrow. I asked the ranger if there was any other way around, but he just glared at me and said no. We all struggled with our heavy packs on our backs. At one point, I was on all fours, just trying to keep from sliding into the ravine, and that's when it happened. Adrienne was having trouble keeping her feet on the trail. She kept slipping. I reached out and helped her balance a few times, being right in front of me. I kept an eye on her whenever I could. That wasn't nearly as much as I wanted because I was watching my own feet. She slipped once, and I tried to grab her, but she had tipped over, and the weight of her backpack had dragged her over the side. I watched in horror as she tumbled down into the ravine, bouncing off trees as she went. I saw her skull make a solid impact several times as she tumbled to the bottom and slid to a stop. I couldn't see if she was still breathing or not. As I called her name, she didn't move. I called for the ranger in front of us and pointed to her AR moving body. He stared at her for a long time. I don't know if he was trying to see if she was alive or not, but he told us to keep going up the trail to the top and that he would go and check on her. I watched as he carefully made his way back down the nearly sheer slope. We kept moving forward as instructed. He was only halfway down when we had made it to the top. I was a wreck. I was so happy that we had made it, but sad for Adrienne. I didn't hold out much hope that the ranger was going to come trotting into camp with her on his back, saying that she had only had a few bumps and scratches. We started a fire and then sat around it in a stupor. Finally, Terry came over and talked to me. "Look, I understand she was your friend, but she was ours too," he said. "We need to work together to get out of here." "For them, that's so stupid that it makes sense," I said with the remnants of a smile. Now, it was then that the ranger had reappeared. He sat by the fire and didn't say a word. There was something in his eyes. It wasn't sadness, but I don't know exactly what it was. We knew that she wasn't coming back. We rested for a little while and then started out on the trail again. "If you're following us, I hope you're being careful. Stay safe." Wow, this girl. Do something else. With all she's gone through, she still wants me to be safe. I hope that I find her. I think she would make a good ranger. My guilty conscience jumped up on my back and yelled at me, "How can you sit around and rest when that poor girl just lost her friend and needs your help?" I knew that it was right. I just didn't know why that other ranger was being so careless. I struggled to get up, kicked out the fire, and started after them. The daylight was dimming, but it was only 8 in the morning. I looked up and saw why. Storm clouds were overtaking the sky. Yet another reason I wish that I would have brought my backpack. The raindrops hit like a cold slap in the face. Even though it was still September, out here in the mountains, the weather can change in a heartbeat. We weren't at the top of the mountain, but in the middle, which was enough for the weather change to make me shiver. Now that we were out of the ravine, I tried my radio again, but it was just static. I knew that there were some places where the radio inexplicably wouldn't work. I just hoped to get away from the interference before it was too late. The trail was clear in front of me, but that was little comfort when walking in open fields with no rain cover. All those trees that I traipsed through, and now in the rain, I have wide open spaces. I would say that someone doesn't like me. The rain just didn't pass like a shower. It poured so hard that it became difficult to see in front of me. For a long time, I trudged through the rain. At times, it felt like I was walking in place. The mud was starting to cake on my boots, and then my salvation appeared in front of me. On the trail was a tent. I called out before I unzipped the tent and let myself in. I flopped down onto the wonderful dry floor and then quickly turned and zipped the entrance back up. I breathed a sigh of relief, but as I did, a stench hit my nose. I looked over at the sleeping bag and it was full. "Hey, I'm sorry to barge in like this, but I needed to get out of the rain," I said. No response. I nudged the person in the bag. It tipped to the side and rocked right back. And that's when I noticed these splotches of red that had soaked through the bag. I didn't want to see, but I pulled the top of the sleeping bag away from the person's face. The bad part was how they no longer had a face. It had been ripped away, and the neck had been gouged out. There were large wounds on the body as well. I tried to feel for a pulse, but when my fingers went straight into the muscles of the neck, I figured there was no pulse to feel. I wiped my fingers on the sleeping bag and pondered why this person was covered. I know the animal who did this didn't gently cover up the person with a sleeping bag when it was done. I found my answer laying above the head of the person. It was an out. I can't believe Terry's dead. I wish that I had never come on this trip. I wish that I'd never let Devin bully us into turning down this trail. Where the heck is Devin anyway? When he stormed off on his little pity party, did he run across whatever creature had been stalking us? Is he sitting back in his tent now and enjoying himself? I really don't know. We were enjoying not climbing up the face of the ravine, but we were very tired. I mentioned stopping and camping for a little bit to the ranger. He looked around and even sniffed the air. It seemed like a weird thing to do, but after that, he agreed to let us set up camp. He even told us to do it as quickly as we could. We gathered wood for a fire, but he told us not to bother because the rain was coming. I guess that explains the sniffing the air thing. Our tents had been up maybe 15 minutes when it started raining. It quickly turned into a downpour. We all offered the ranger to sit in our tents with us, and he looked over us one by one. It was kind of creepy. Finally, he said that he would sit with Terry in his tent, and Dean and I looked at each other with a relieved expression. The ranger is helping us, but he isn't someone that I would like to ever see again. He acts too weird at times. I wonder if he's really even helping us. I just closed my eyes, listening to the rain on the tent and letting it carry me off to dreamland. When the ranger had ripped over my tent, he said that we needed to pack up and leave right now. That something was hunting us. We dove out into the rain and miserably packed our tents. He reassured us that there was a nice cave nearby and that we could get shelter there. As I was packing up, I didn't see Terry, so I went over to his tent. When there was no answer, I went in and found what was left of his body. Something had torn him to shreds. I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting and ran out to tell the others. Dean and the ranger looked in and saw that there was no helping him. The ranger said that he had left the tent to go to the bathroom, and when he came back, he saw a predator hanging around the tents. That's when he came to wake us up. It must have already gotten to Terry. I pulled a sleeping bag over his head and wished that we had time to give him a proper burial, but the ranger said the animal might be back for the rest of us, so we quickly packed and left. I barely had time to finish the note. Please help us. A cave? What kind of ranger is he? Doesn't he realize that would be the most likely place a large predator would call home? I thought for a moment what cave he could be talking about. I hadn't been on this trail for 5 years, ever since I found the kid here, and then it hit me. We were very close to the place where we had found him. Why would he take them there? Unless I jumped up so quickly that I nearly fell on top of the body when I forgot and put too much weight on my injured ankle. I hobbled out of the tent and went as quickly as I could toward the place that I swore I would never see again. I approached the cave, and my heart sank. 2 backpacks sat just inside the entrance. I pulled out my knife and flashlight, then cautiously peered inside. I felt a change in the breeze and turned to find the ranger staring at me. I looked him up and down. "You," I said. "The last time I saw you was when we found the boy." He said nothing. "It was never a random animal to attack," I said. "It was you." He took a step toward me. "Of course it was," he said. "How wonderful was it to watch you years ago as you floundered around looking for some predator that stood beside you?" "You." I pulled out my knife and held it ready. He paused and then smiled. "Do you really think that knife can hurt me?" I looked at it. "Pretty sure," I said. "It's made of iron." His smile vanished. "So you do know what I am?" I pulled out a bottle of brown water. I made sure to grab some runoff from the rainstorm. I said it might not do as good as rust water, but let's find out. I opened the bottle and threw some water at him. He dodged it as though it was acid. At the same time I swung with the knife, he dodged with ease. "Why don't you turn into what you truly are?" I said, taunting him. "Well, because we both know when I transform, I'm vulnerable for a moment," he said. "And I'm sure you would like to take advantage of that vulnerable moment." He swung and connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I recovered and swung the knife in a vicious downswing at him, which he easily dodged. I kept moving forward, stabbing and slashing at him, but I couldn't get close enough to connect. He was too fast. "You can't defeat me," he said. "Look at you, like an injured deer just waiting to be devoured." "Be quiet ye now, Lucy," I yelled at the mention of his name. He froze. I knew that I didn't have much time. I took advantage of the moment, lunging at him with my knife. If I had been uninjured, I would have closed the distance between us with 2 quick steps and buried the knife in his heart. But unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, I forgot about my injured ankle. I stepped forward on my good leg and then faltered when I tried to put weight on the injured one. Instead of burying the knife in his heart, it went through his left thigh. He screamed in pain and ran out of the cave. I took out my flashlight and started toward the back of the cave. There, I found a body next to a pile of bones. There was a note in her hand, and I sat down, took it, and read. I can't believe how stupid I was not to see this sooner. All the time guiding us was just a play. He never wanted to help us. He never cared about any of us or our safety. I need to read this quickly before he comes back. The ranger led us here and told us to wait, that we would be safe in the cave. He left us alone. Dean pulled out his flashlight and explored deeper into the cave. He found a large pile of bones, and off to the side of them was a pile of clothes. We ran toward the opening, but the ranger had returned. "So you didn't listen?" he said, leering at us. "I told you to stay here and not explore my home." "What are you?" I said. He smiled for the first time since I had met him, but his smile wasn't comforting. It was terrifying. I watched in horror as he changed into a giant cat creature. It didn't look quite like a panther or a mountain lion, but he lunged at us with amazing speed. He grabbed my leg and tore a large gash in it. I fell to the floor screaming. Dean tried to defend me, swinging his knife around and holding it at bay, but it circled around him and cornered him. He only had one chance. He lifted me with sadness in his eyes and then ran past the creature and out of the cave. It looked at me and my leg and then sprinted out after Dean. I know why he did it. He was trying to give me time to escape. But with my leg, there was no way that I could run from that thing. What he actually did was give me time to say goodbye. So if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I led you to your death. If you do somehow survive and make it out of here, please tell their families what really happened. Goodbye. I fought back tears as I read the final words of this brave girl. I limped to the front of the cave and looked out as the rain had stopped. It was like seeing a new world being born. I tried my radio and got an immediate answer. I gave them my GPS coordinates and told them to prepare for casualties. I'm still a park ranger, even months later. I made sure that the trail was sealed off too. I carry an iron knife and rust water with me at all times. I carry the rust water and a squirt gun just in case. The bones were removed from the cave and subjected to DNA testing. Aside from this group of victims, including Devin, there were other people who had gone missing in the park over the years. The official version of the event was that a rogue animal had been hunting people. I was told that it would be best for my career if I didn't reveal the true nature of the predator. I still search for the creature and post signs everywhere to be on the lookout for an older ranger wearing a uniform with no patches on it. There's a number to call if anyone spots him. It's my personal cell number. From time to time, I hear reports of a large cat that's limping on a tin leg. I try to make my way to that spot as quickly as possible, but I have yet to catch him. I posted this story in memory of that brave girl, but also as a warning. Never go on an unposted trail and beware of those you meet in the woods, even if they wear a uniform. I could sense the isolation the instant our tires left the main road and hit that patchy excuse for gravel. Every bump felt magnified, like even the dirt wanted us to turn back. My boyfriend, who I'll call Dylan, tried to act like all this was part of the adventure, but I caught him glancing in the rearview mirror more than once, scanning the empty stretch behind us. We'd heard about this primitive camping spot from a friend of a friend, a place so remote you'd swear you were on another planet. No designated sites, no cell service, no company other than the occasional deer wandering past. We thought it would be just the escape we needed. As the road got narrower and the trees pressed in, I began to wonder if we were going too far off-grid. After what felt like an hour of muddy twists and turns, we noticed a truck pulled off by the side. Its hood was popped, but there was no sign of obvious trouble. No steam, no frantic waving. A woman leaned against the driver's door, not trying to flag us down or anything. She just stood there. We slowed a little, automatically ready to help, but Dylan gripped the wheel and shook his head, his gaze locked on her. The way she stared made me feel like she'd been expecting us specifically, like we were already part of some plan she had in mind. I tried to get a better look at her face, but Dylan pressed the gas, and suddenly she was just a figure in the rearview mirror. I caught myself checking the side mirror, half expecting her to jump in her truck and follow. That didn't happen, or at least not right then. We headed on, but the air inside our car felt heavy. Dylan said it was nothing, but I knew better. It took us another 10 or 15 minutes to find a place to pull off. The spot wasn't ideal, mud clung to our boots, and we had to stomp around a bit to find a decent patch for the tent. Still, it was level enough, and we figured we'd be left alone. That was the whole point, right? We set up a small fire, both of us trying to shake off our uneasy start. I cracked a couple of jokes about wanting s'mores, hoping that normal conversation might make everything feel safer. Then a car crawled by, a rusty old sedan with a driver who slowed to stare at us. I tried not to dwell on it. Maybe he was just curious. But when the same car came back a second time, lingering even longer, my pulse pounded. Dylan muttered something about folks trying to find dry land in this swampy mess. I nodded, but secretly, I wasn't buying it. He circled back again. This time, I locked eyes with him for a split second. He didn't smile or wave, just kept his gaze fixed on us before he drove off. Dylan and I shared a look. Neither of us voiced what we were thinking. Maybe we should leave, but the idea of hauling all our stuff through slippery mud, only to have him follow our tracks, made that plan seem pointless. Dusk arrived, bringing the kind of silence that feels unnatural. Our tiny fire crackled in the clearing, but the dark pressed in from every side. We ate our hot dogs in intense silence, checking the road every few minutes, waiting to see headlights creeping by. When nothing else happened, we tried to call it a night. The moment we zipped ourselves into the tent, though, every rustle, every snap from the fire's dying embers felt ominous. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, reminding myself that weird encounters happen sometimes, especially far from civilization. Dylan seemed tense too, tossing and turning, but we both tried to act like we were fine. Neither of us wanted to be the one to say, "Let's pack up right now," not when we'd invested so much energy just getting there. The last thing I remember before drifting off was wishing the night would pass quickly. But deep down, I sensed things were about to get a whole lot worse. Night settled around us in a suffocating hush. I remember lying there, counting the seconds between the crackling embers of our dying fire and the distant rustle of undergrowth. Dylan's breathing was shallow. I could tell he was as on edge as I was, though neither of us admitted it. Sometime past midnight, must have been closer to 3 a.m., an awful noise tore through the silence. It was this warped combination of metal scraping across gravel and a machine trying to start up. It came in bursts, each one echoing through the trees. My chest tightened as I strained to figure out how close it was. Dylan quietly unzipped the tent window just enough to peer out. The moonlight painted the clearing in pale light, but everything looked still. The sound must have been bouncing around the hills, or maybe it was closer than I realized. My mind was racing with questions I didn't dare say out loud. I heard Dylan whisper that it could be far away, but his voice wavered. It didn't sound like he believed that himself. I kept imagining shapes moving at the edge of the clearing, people lurking just out of sight. Usually I'd rationalize it all away, tell myself it was a weird echo, an animal, anything. But there was nothing familiar about that metallic grinding. A few minutes later, Dylan sat up and started rummaging through our gear. My pulse hammered as he pulled out the machete we'd packed. It was still wrapped in that plastic packaging because we never intended to use it for more than chopping brush. Seeing him carefully remove it in the middle of the night in total silence made me realize we were past the point of hoping this would all blow over. He motioned for me to get dressed quickly. No big speech, no debate. We both knew we needed to leave. We moved as quietly as possible, unzipping the tent and emerging into the cool night. My senses were in overdrive. My eyes jumped to every shifting shadow. My ears caught every twitch in the undergrowth. We started gathering our gear in the weak moonlight. I almost tripped over an empty can I hadn't noticed before. I nudged Dylan, and he froze. We hadn't brought any beer, so it definitely wasn't ours. That realization sent a jolt of panic through me. Someone had been here, close enough to leave trash by our embers. We didn't bother taking time for a detailed cleanup. We crammed our sleeping bags into the trunk, tossed the tent on top, and locked ourselves in the car. Dylan checked the gas gauge. He'd been worried that whoever was out there might have siphoned our tank. Thankfully, we still had enough to get out of there. He fired up the engine, and the headlights carved two stark beams through the dark. Every tree seemed like a potential hiding spot, and every bend in the mud road threatened to reveal something we weren't ready to face. We kept our eyes peeled for movement as we barreled through puddles and slick patches, slipping a bit now and then, but never stopping. Once we finally got onto a more solid stretch of gravel, I let myself breathe a little. Dylan tried to make a joke, something about how a hybrid saved us from ending up in some horror movie, but even the humor felt forced. We were both still wired, scanning the roadside as if the woman by the truck or that circling car might appear around the next bend. When we reached a main road, we didn't say much. Relief washed over us, but it was the kind that left a bitter aftertaste. We'd wanted isolation and ended up feeling hunted. Neither of us slept easily that night, and for the rest of the trip, we stuck to crowded campgrounds or cheap motels with bright lights in the parking lot. I couldn't believe how different everything looked when morning finally came, but that lingering sense of unease stayed with me. In a single night, our idea of a remote, peaceful getaway had been ripped apart by something, or someone, we never even got a good look at. I remember the first night I truly understood what it meant to be alone in the woods. Not just solitude in the sense of distance from people, but alone in the way that the earth itself seemed to be breathing around me, as if the forest had become something alive, watchful, and waiting. My name is Daniel Morgan. I'm 42 years old, a forest ranger in the Northern Rockies. I've worked in these woods for almost 2 decades now, and in that time I've come to know the smell of pine resin heavy in summer heat, the brittle crunch of dry leaves under elk hooves, the soft percussion of snow falling in thick curtains at night. These sounds and smells are the language of my life, but every so often the forest speaks in a different tongue, one that human ears were never meant to understand. People think forest rangers are hardened, unshakable, immune to fear. They imagine us as stoic figures in green uniforms, endlessly patrolling the trails, smiling politely at campers, rescuing the occasional lost hiker, and locking up the ranger station at night without a second thought. But that's only the surface. The truth is, the woods change you. They carve away at your confidence until you realize how fragile you are, how little you control. I didn't always know that. I used to believe I was unshakable. Then the forest taught me differently. When I first joined the service, I was stationed in Yellowstone. I was 24, full of fire and ambition, convinced I was invincible. My mentor, an older ranger named Cliff, told me once, "The forest doesn't show its teeth unless you stop paying attention. Stay sharp, Danny. Don't get comfortable." At the time, I laughed. I thought he was just trying to keep the rookie on edge. But years later, I heard those words echoing inside my head, and they felt more like a warning left behind by someone who had seen what I was about to see. The first time the forest pushed back against me was in the winter of 2009. I'd been assigned a week-long rotation at one of the northern outposts, a small wooden cabin tucked deep along a ridge miles away from the nearest paved road. Snow had piled up so high that the trees sagged under its weight, their branches arching like frozen cathedral ceilings. My job was simple: monitor wildlife, keep the fire tower manned, and radio and daily reports. It should have been routine. But almost immediately, something felt off. The first sign was sound. Nights in the forest are never truly silent. You hear the scuttle of mice under the cabin floorboards, the distant yips of coyotes, the groan of trees swaying in the wind. But that week, the silence was too clean. It wasn't peace. It was vacancy, as though something had emptied the woods. I kept catching myself listening harder, my breath clouding against the window, straining to hear what wasn't there. That emptiness gnawed at me more than any predator's howl ever could. On the third night, it changed. I was writing in the logbook when I heard a knock on the cabin door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate. My first thought was a lost hiker, maybe half frozen, needing help. I pulled on my coat, unlatched the door, and stepped out into the cold. But no one was there, just snow falling thick and heavy. My boot prints were the only ones breaking the powder. I stood there, scanning the trees with my flashlight beam, slicing through the flakes, waiting for movement. Nothing, just silence, broken only by the static hiss of snow against the jacket hood. I went back inside, trying to shake it off. Maybe the wood had popped, maybe I'd imagined it. But 10 minutes later, the knocking came again. Same rhythm. 3 knocks, louder this time. I rushed to the door and yanked it open, faster, hoping to catch someone in the act. But again, there was nothing. Only snow. Only trees. That was the first time I felt it, the sensation of being studied. Not watched, not stalked, but studied. The way you might watch an insect crawling across your palm, curious how it will behave. It sank into me, bone deep, a fear I couldn't rationalize. I remember sitting by the wood stove that night, gripping the radio handset like a lifeline, whispering to myself that dawn was coming, dawn was coming, dawn was coming. Somehow, I made it through. By morning, the air seemed lighter, and I convinced myself it had been nothing but exhaustion and nerves. But I never forgot the knock. Never forgot how precise it was. Over the years, I collected stories like that. Not just my own, but from other rangers. We trade them in quiet moments, usually over coffee or by the fire after a long shift. We rarely say them out loud to outsiders because they sound like madness, and no ranger wants to be dismissed as superstitious. But among ourselves, the stories spill like confessions, the sound of a woman singing in the pines where no woman could possibly be, a child's laughter echoing across a ravine in the dead of night, footprints leading into fresh snow that never lead back out. Some rangers chalk it up to stress, to imagination. Others, like me, know better. One of the strangest encounters came during the summer of 2014. I'd been reassigned to the Cascades, a stretch of jagged wilderness with dense hemlock forests and deep caves carved into the stone. My partner at the time, a ranger named Ellen, and I were tasked with tracking reports of illegal campers setting up fires near a restricted cave system. We set out before dawn, hiking through the undergrowth with our radios clipped to our packs, expecting nothing more than to find some beer cans and a smoldering fire ring. But when we reached the mouth of the cave, there was no sign of people, no ashes, no trash, no trampled brush, just a strange, acrid smell, like wet fur and rusted metal. It hit us so strong we both gagged. Ellen shined her flashlight into the cave, and the beam lit up a scatter of bones. Not human, but deer, elk, even small predators like foxes. They weren't chewed the way wolves would leave them. They were snapped clean, marrow sucked out. The pile was too deliberate, arranged almost like an offering. And worse, every bone was stripped bare, as though whatever had fed didn't waste a single shred. We stood there in silence, the forest pressing in tight around us. Then we heard it, a low, throaty growl, reverberating deep from within the cave. Not a bear's warning, not a cougar's hiss. This sound was heavier, wetter, layered, as though 2 voices were growling at once. My hand went for my radio, but static hissed through it. Useless. Ellen whispered, "We should go." I wanted to agree, but my feet wouldn't move. Something in me was locked, caught between the primal instinct to run and the professional training to investigate. And then, just as I finally forced myself to step back, the sound stopped. Dead silence. The air grew so still that even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. That's when Ellen nudged me hard and pointed at the ground near the cave mouth. Fresh prints. Massive. Upright, not on all fours. human-like, but easily twice the length of my boot. We didn't wait to study them. We left fast, not stopping until the trail spit us back onto the ranger road. Neither of us wrote it in the official report. Instead, we just marked the cave as restricted, citing unsafe conditions. It wasn't a lie. Whatever lived there wasn't safe, for us or for anyone. That night, lying awake in my cabin, I thought back to Cliff's warning years earlier. Don't get comfortable. He'd been right. Because the moment you start to think you understand the forest reminds you just how little you know. I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than a trick of light, an animal's distorted print left in soft soil, or maybe our nerves magnifying something that wasn't there. But that's the lie every ranger tells themselves after something they can't explain. It's easier to fold the unexplainable into a shape that fits inside reason. That night, though, the lie didn't hold. I lay awake with my eyes on the ceiling, the stillness pressing against my chest, and I could smell it again, the same sour, metallic musk from the cave, drifting through my memory like it had followed me home. I didn't tell anyone else at the station. Ellen didn't either. We made an unspoken pact in our silence. But silence doesn't erase truth. For weeks afterward, I avoided that cave system, though it stayed in my head, tugging at me like a thread I was afraid to pull. Rangers are supposed to confront danger, not avoid it. But there are dangers you don't face head on. Because if you do, they face you back. Still, the forest has a way of cornering you when you least expect it. Later that same summer, I was assigned to patrol a remote stretch of trail about 15 miles north of that cave system. The terrain there was brutal. Steep switchbacks, thick undergrowth, and endless ridgelines that left you disoriented. I was alone on this patrol, carrying nothing more than my radio, sidearm, and journal. I'd been out for hours when I began to notice something odd. The forest was alive with birdsong, crickets, and the chatter of squirrels, but as I moved deeper into the ridge, the sounds thinned out. One call would vanish, then another, until there was nothing. Just that unbearable quiet again. I stopped on the trail and listened, my ears strained so hard it hurt. And then I heard it, a whistle. Short, sharp, high-pitched. It echoed once, then again, from deeper in the trees. My first thought was another hiker, maybe someone trying to signal for help, but no human whistle I'd ever heard carried that far, nor did it hold that uncanny pitch. Still duty-bound, I called out, "Hello, this is Ranger Morgan. Do you need assistance?" The forest swallowed my words whole. Silence stretched so long I started to feel foolish, standing there alone, waiting for a response that never came. Then, a third whistle, this one closer, behind me. I spun, hand instinctively on my sidearm. The trail behind me was empty, but I swear on my life I felt eyes on me. My scalp tingled, my chest tightened, something was near, something intelligent enough to mimic, to test me. I forced myself to keep moving, each step heavy, deliberate, like I was walking through water. The whistles followed, sometimes far, sometimes near, always just at the edge of hearing. By the time I reached the ranger road, my legs were shaking. That night, I dreamed of the cave again, of bones stacked like cairns, of footprints pressed deep into soil, of a massive shadow crouched just beyond the firelight. When I woke, my shirt was plastered to my chest with sweat, and I could still hear the whistle in my ears, faint and mocking. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but encounters like these never end. They shift, they return, they wear new masks. Years passed, and I carried those experiences like stones in my pack, never spoken of, never written down, but heavy all the same. In 2017, I transferred to a different post, Olympic National Forest, a land of fog-drenched peaks, moss-laden branches, and valleys that feel older than time itself. If the Rockies had taught me to respect the wilderness, Olympic taught me to fear it. The place hums with an energy that you feel in your bones. Old-growth trees rise like pillars, their trunks wide enough to swallow a truck. Fog drifts in thick curtains, so heavy it muffles sound until you can't tell if you're hearing your own breath or someone else's. My first assignment there was to monitor a section of trails closed off due to rock slides. The area was riddled with caves and narrow valleys where light barely reached the ground. On my second night alone in the field, camped by a stream, I awoke to a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for a dream, the sound of breathing. Not mine, not an animal's panting. This was steady, slow, measured, like someone trying not to be heard. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my flashlight already in my hand. I clicked it on and swept it across the trees. Shadows bent and twisted, but nothing moved. The breathing stopped. For a long time, I sat frozen, light fixed on the tree line. When at last I convinced myself it was my imagination, I lay back down, heart pounding. But then I smelled it again, that same sharp metallic musk. Sleep never came. The next morning, I found tracks in the damp soil by the stream. Large, broad, human-like. They stopped only 10 feet from my tent, turned sharply, and vanished into the moss. I crouched down, tracing one print with my fingers, and a cold realization shivered through me. It had been standing there, close enough to reach out and touch the fabric of my tent, just watching. I carried those prints back with me in my mind, and though I never mentioned them in my report, I couldn't let them go. That summer, more incidents followed. Whistles at dusk, rocks clattering down slopes where no one should be, a shape massive and hunched, darting between trees just beyond sight. Campers reported screams at night, screams that sounded like people, but came from places no person could be. Each time I responded, each time I came up empty, and yet the forest felt charged with an unseen presence, as if the trees themselves leaned closer, listening, waiting. By then, I'd stopped laughing at the old ranger tales, the voices in the trees, the shadows in caves, the feeling of being herded, pushed, studied. I understood them now, and I understood something else too. Whatever stalks those woods is not interested in killing, not immediately. No, it's interested in something worse. It wants you to know it's there. It wants to peel back the skin of your certainty, strip away your logic until you are raw with fear. And maybe that's the worst truth of all, that the forest isn't just alive. It's aware. And sometimes it speaks. The deeper I went into Olympic, the more it felt less like I was patrolling wilderness and more like I was trespassing in someone's home. The sensation wasn't constant. It would come and go in waves, cresting suddenly as though an invisible gaze had fixed itself on me, then retreating, leaving me unsettled and raw. The other rangers joked about it, called it forest paranoia, but the joke never landed for me because I knew it wasn't in my head. It was outside, circling. There was one trail in particular I began to dread. It wasn't long, just a narrow loop that ran along a ridge and curved into a cluster of caves known as Raven's Maw. The caves weren't especially deep, but the rock walls funneled sound in strange ways. You could stand at the entrance and whisper, and your voice would seem to echo from inside. I hated being assigned to Raven's Maw, but that summer it fell to me more times than I could count. It was during one of those patrols that I caught the first glimpse of it. Not a shadow this time, not a whistle or a footprint. A shape. I had stopped near the cave mouth, jotting notes in my logbook about fallen branches on the trail. The air was cool, damp, carrying the smell of moss and wet stone. I remember pausing because I heard something, breathing again, faint but steady. I lifted my head, turned slowly toward the cave, and in the dim light filtering through the fog, I saw it. A figure crouched low at the far end of the opening. It was too far to make out details, but the size was wrong. Too large for a man, too solid. Shoulders hunched nearly to the ceiling, head cocked at an unnatural angle like it was studying me. For a moment, my brain fought to rationalize. A trick of shadow, a boulder, anything but what it looked like. But then it shifted, just slightly, enough that the bulk of its body moved against the stone. I froze, my breath trapped in my throat, and then it did something I'll never forget. It inhaled, loud, deep, a wet, dragging breath that echoed out of the cave and straight into me. I staggered back, nearly dropping my logbook, and the figure melted into darkness. I should have reported it. I should have called it in. But when I finally found my voice, all I could do was radio in a clipped status update. Trail clear, returning to station. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. That night, the dream came again, only this time it wasn't the cave from the Cascades, it was Raven's Maw. I was inside, my flashlight beam jittering against the stone, illuminating claw marks carved deep into the walls. Behind me, that same dragging breath. Closer. Always closer. When I woke, my hand was clutching my chest so hard my nails had broken skin. Over the following weeks, reports from hikers began to filter in missing time. People swore they'd only been hiking for a couple of hours, yet when they returned to the trailhead, 6, sometimes 8 hours had passed. Campers claimed they'd heard heavy footfalls outside their tents, too slow, too deliberate to be an animal. One family left in the middle of the night after their youngest son insisted someone had been whispering his name from the trees. None of these made it into the official logs. We handled them quietly, telling visitors it was stress, fatigue, or overactive imaginations. But we knew. We always know. The forest doesn't give warnings without reason. Then came the night everything boiled over. It was late September, the air sharp with the bite of early frost. I had been asked to check on a backcountry camp near Raven's Maw after 2 hikers failed to radio in. By the time I set out, dusk had already swallowed the ridge, and fog was pouring through the trees in thick rolling veils. My flashlight was a thin blade against it, barely cutting more than a few feet ahead. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself was pushing back. When I reached the camp, it was empty. Tents were still standing, backpacks half-zipped, a lantern tipped over in the dirt. No sign of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away. It looked as though the campers had simply stood up and walked into the mist. I was crouched near the lantern when I heard it, a rock tumbling against stone from the direction of the caves. My head snapped up and the air grew suddenly colder, sharp enough that each breath stung my lungs. Slowly, I turned my light toward Raven's Maw. The beam shook in my hand, bouncing off slick rock. There it was, standing just inside the cave. Not crouched this time, upright, immense, its head nearly brushing the ceiling, shoulders broad enough to fill the passage. The beam of my flashlight caught its eyes, 2 pinpricks of pale reflection fixed directly on me. For a heartbeat, we were locked there, silence stretching taut, broken only by my own breath, rasping through the fog. And then it moved. 1 step forward, impossibly smooth for its size. The sound of its footfall was muffled by the moss, but the vibration carried through the ground, up through my boots into my bones. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Not yet. I forced my radio to my lips, whispering a call sign, trying to get something, anything through. Static. Just static, the same as in the Cascades years ago. It took another step. The smell hit me, that same rancid cocktail of wet fur, blood, and iron. My hand went to my sidearm. I knew it wouldn't matter, knew a weapon that small wouldn't stop whatever this was, but in that moment, it was all I had. I raised my voice, trying to sound steady. Stay back. Don't come any closer. The words sounded thin, useless against the massive shadow and muscle standing in that cave. And then, it spoke. Not words, not anything human, but a sound, low and resonant, somewhere between a growl and a hum. It vibrated through the air, through me, like the forest itself had found a voice. The next thing I remember is running, my legs moving before my mind caught up, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at my arms and face. Behind me, I heard it. Footfalls, heavy, unhurried, following. Not chasing, following. Like it knew there was no need to rush. I don't remember how long I ran. Long enough that my lungs felt like they were tearing open, long enough that I collapsed against a tree, vision swimming, and when I finally dared to look back, there was nothing. Just fog. Just silence. But I knew it was still there, waiting. When I stumbled back into the station hours later, I looked like I'd been dragged through hell. The other rangers asked what happened, but I couldn't answer. My voice wouldn't come. All I could do was sit there, shaking, as the forest pressed its secret deeper into me. I didn't sleep for days after Raven's Maw. Not really. My body would collapse, but my mind kept running, caught in that endless loop of pale eyes glinting from the cave mouth, of breath that wasn't mine vibrating against the stone. Stone, Every sound in the station set me off. The slam of a locker, the click of a pen, even the faint hum of the radio. It all felt wrong, intrusive, like the forest was still inside me, echoing through my nerves. The other rangers noticed, though none of them said anything directly. They'd seen this before. We all had. Every now and then a ranger would come back from patrol different, jumpy, silent, their face hollowed out like something had been scraped away from the inside. Some recovered. Some didn't. Cliff hadn't. He retired early, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't even sign his name without 2 tries. When I visited him years later, he told me, "The forest remembers. Don't forget that." At the time, I didn't understand. Now I did. 2 weeks after Raven's Maw, the call came in. A boy had gone missing. 9 years old, camping with his family near the Bogachiel River. He'd been playing hide-and-seek with his sister in the trees. One moment, laughter. The next, silence. They searched for him for hours before finally calling us. Missing children are the darkest part of this job. You drop everything, you mobilize every ranger, every volunteer. Time isn't on your side. The forest swallows people quickly, especially the young, but something about this case had a different weight to it, a heaviness that pressed against the air like a storm waiting to break. I was assigned to a search grid not far from Raven's Maw. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boys' tracks were easy to follow at first, small sneakers pressed into mud, weaving between ferns. Then they stopped. Clean, no drag marks, no signs of struggle, just ended. Like he'd stepped off the earth and vanished. I knelt there for a long time, staring at those final prints, my stomach tight. Behind me, I could hear the other searchers calling his name, their voices rolling through the trees. But I stayed quiet, because in the stillness I heard something else. A whistle, not loud, faint, almost playful. My throat closed. I turned slowly, scanning the trees with my flashlight, even though it was still daylight. The whistle came again, farther this time, deeper into the woods. It carried that same mocking pitch I'd heard years earlier on the ridge. I wanted to call out, but something in me knew better. Knew that whatever was whistling wasn't trying to be found. It was trying to lure. Hours stretched into night. Search parties regrouped, faces drawn tight with exhaustion. No one had found a trace of the boy beyond those last prints. Not his jacket, not a dropped toy, nothing. Just emptiness, as though the forest had erased him. When darkness fell, the search was called off until morning. But I couldn't leave. I lingered near the prints, flashlight beam cutting into the black. The woods pressed close, too close, like the trees had leaned in to listen. My skin prickled with the sensation of being studied again. And then, just at the edge of my light, I saw it. A shape, crouched low, massive, half hidden behind a trunk. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the beam, again, my exhausted eyes conjuring shadows. But then it shifted, just slightly, and the outline of a head tilted toward me. Taller than any man, wider too. I couldn't see the face, only the glint of eyeshine catching the light. My hand went for the radio, but the static hiss screamed through it again. My body shook with the urge to shout, to demand it give the boy back, to do something. But my voice wouldn't come, and then the shape melted into the trees, swallowed by the dark. The boy was never found. The official report cited exposure, possible animal predation, the usual words we use when there's nothing else to explain the unexplainable. But his family didn't believe it. Neither did I, because I'd seen those prints, because I'd heard the whistle, because I knew what watched me from the trees. That case marked the beginning of the end for me. Afterward, everything felt sharper, more hostile. The forest I once loved became something predatory, something that tested the edges of my sanity. I began waking at night to scratching on the walls of my cabin, soft but deliberate. My boots went missing one morning, only to be found hours later on the roof. Once I returned from patrol to find the door to my cabin wide open, though I knew I'd locked it. And always, the smell. That iron tang, that wet fur stench drifting in and out like a taunt. I tried to rationalize. Lack of sleep, stress, hallucinations born from years of solitude. But each time I reached for those explanations, I remembered the eyeshine, The breath in the cave, the footprints that ended where they shouldn't, the boy who vanished without a sound. One night I broke. I'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, mind racing, when I heard it again. The knock. 3 sharp raps against the cabin door, the same rhythm I'd first heard years ago in Yellowstone. My blood turned cold. Slowly I stood, every muscle tight, and gripped the handle of my sidearm. The knocks came again. I walked to the door, my legs trembling, and pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I swallowed hard, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. Then, without thinking, I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just night. Trees swaying, fog rolling low across the ground. But this time there were prints leading away from the porch, massive, upright, straight into the forest. I don't know what possessed me, but I followed. My flashlight beam jittered as I moved, tracking the prints as they sank deeper into the moss. The forest was alive with silence, the kind that presses against your skull. My breath fogged the air, and each step felt like a descent. The prints led me to Raven's Maw. I stopped at the entrance, heart in my throat, light trembling over the dark mouth of the cave. The smell was overwhelming now, thick and choking. I wanted to turn back. Every cell in my body screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. I took one step inside, then another. My light skimmed the walls, catching grooves, claw marks, deep and wide. Bones littered the ground, arranged in patterns I couldn't comprehend, and then from the black ahead came that sound again. The breath. Slow. Heavy. Dragging. Closer. I raised my light and saw it. It stood there in the dark, just far enough that my beam couldn't catch its full shape. All I saw was the glint of its eyes, far too high, far too wide apart to belong to a man. The reflection shimmered with a pale, unnatural gleam, like moonlight trapped in glass. My breath hitched, and for a moment I couldn't move. My body knew what my mind refused to admit. I was prey. The thing shifted, and the sound echoed across the cave walls, a slow, deliberate step. My beam caught the brief flash of coarse hair, thick and matted, clinging with filth. I lifted my sidearm, my hands trembling so badly the barrel shook in the light. The cave felt alive, pressing in, funneling my fear back toward me in waves. Then it exhaled. The breath rolled out heavy and wet, vibrating in my chest. It wasn't just sound, it was a presence filling the air, filling me. My knees threatened to give. Somewhere deep inside, the ranger in me fought to surface, whispering about procedure, about caution, about survival. But louder than that was something older, something primal. Run. I managed to take one step back, then another. My light trembled over the bones at my feet, elk, deer, bear, all picked clean. And then I saw something that made my stomach lurch. A shoe. Small. Mud-stained. A child's. The boy, the edges of my vision pulsed black. My mind screamed to deny it, to explain it away, but the truth lay there in the dirt, undeniable. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some myth lurking in the trees. It took. It fed. The growl rose then, deeper, layered, as if 2 throats spoke at once. It reverberated against the stone, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. I staggered, nearly dropping the flashlight, and in that lurching beam I caught more of it, an arm thick as a tree trunk, ending not in claws but in a hand. Fingers too long, jointed wrong, curling slow, deliberate. The hand flexed, and for the first time, I felt its intent. It wasn't rushing me, wasn't lunging. It was waiting, watching how I would move, studying me. That broke something inside. I turned and bolted. The beam whipped wild across the walls as I ran, bouncing off gouges and bones, and behind me came the sound of it moving. Not fast, heavy, steady, each footfall booming through the cave, closer, closer, though never breaking into a chase. It didn't need to. By the time I burst out into the night air, I was half blind with panic. Fog clawed at my legs, branches whipped my face, but I kept running, lungs tearing open with each gasp. I didn't stop until the faint glow of the Ranger Road lit the fog ahead, the first thread of safety I'd seen in what felt like years. When I collapsed against a post, choking for air, the silence returned. No footsteps, no breath, just the forest holding its secrets close. I thought that was the end, that I had escaped. But escape is the wrong word. because from that night on, I knew there was no getting away from it. It wasn't a question of if I'd see it again, only when. The next weeks blurred together. My body went through the motions, writing reports, checking trails, answering radios, but my mind lived elsewhere. Every rustle of brush set my pulse hammering. Every crack of a branch in the dark made my stomach drop. Sleep came in broken snatches, and when it did, it carried dreams of eyes glinting in caves, of long fingers curling out of the dark. And then came the final straw. I was out on patrol near the Quinault one evening, fog clinging thick to the ground, when I heard it again. That whistle. The same pitch, the same mocking tone I'd heard years earlier on the ridge. My legs locked. The forest was empty, too empty, not a single bird or cricket sounding. The whistle came again, closer now, threading through the fog like it knew exactly where to find me. I raised my flashlight, heart slamming so loud it hurt, and swung it across the trees. And that's when I saw them. Not one set of eyes, 3. All glinting pale in the dark, all fixed on me. I didn't wait to see more. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and I ran harder than I ever had in my life, crashing through branches, tearing skin, lungs screaming for air. The forest around me seemed endless, endless. Every tree another wall, every shadow another trap. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. When I finally stumbled back into the station, bleeding and wild-eyed, the others stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I couldn't explain it to them. Not in a way that wouldn't sound insane. So I just stood there, shaking, while the fog rolled thick outside and the forest pressed its silence against the windows. That was months ago. I haven't been back to Raven's Maw since. Some nights I sit in the cabin, lights off, and listen to the woods. And in the quiet, I hear it, sometimes a breath, sometimes a whistle, sometimes just the memory of a knock on the door. The truth is, we were never meant to own these forests, never meant to cut trails through them, to stake signs in the dirt, to pretend we had authority here. We are guests, temporary, and some hosts are not kind. I still wear the uniform, still patrol the trails, still smile at families who come to camp, to hike, to find peace in the wilderness. But deep down, I know what they don't. There are things out there the reports will never mention, things that watch from the caves, from the fog, from the tree line when the firelight dies, things that take without leaving a trace. And every time I walk those woods, I ask myself one question. When it decides my time is up, will it knock first? I've told myself 1,000 times that I imagined it, that the eyes, the breath, the hand curling from the dark were tricks of exhaustion, stress, an overworked mind cracking under too many long nights in the wilderness. That's what I tell myself when the sun is up and the station is buzzing with voices, when the radio crackles with the chatter of other rangers. In daylight, the rational world returns, and it's easier to believe I dreamed it all. But when the sun dips and the forest swallows its last light, reason falters. It's in the way the trees lean close, their branches weaving into shapes that look like hands in the fog. It's in the silence between the calls of owls, the gaps where the night should be alive but isn't. In those moments, the part of me that spent years studying wildlife and ecology, the part that believes in biology and facts, surrenders. In its place rises the old part, the animal part, the one that knows when it is being watched. I try not to think about the cave, about the boy's shoe, about the other shapes I glimpsed in that dirt, half buried, half hidden by bones. Because to think of them is to acknowledge that it isn't just me, that others have been taken, that the missing person cases that filter quietly through ranger stations, shuffled into files, and whispered about only after dark, might not be the mysteries we pretend they are. Sometimes, when I lie awake in the cabin, I imagine all the stories we don't tell. The backpackers who vanished without a trace, the hunters who never returned, the children whose laughter was last heard in campgrounds that now sit abandoned. We mark them down as lost, as if the woods themselves swallowed them whole. Maybe that's not entirely wrong, but I think it's more deliberate than that. The woods have a memory. That's something you only understand after years out here. They hold everything, fires, storms, deaths, all of it, like scars carved into bark. And caves, they're the deepest wounds. They don't heal. They don't forget. They keep their secrets buried in the dark, waiting for someone foolish enough to go looking. That's what Ravensmaw is to me now. Not a place on a map, not just a cave. It's a symbol, a mouth that never stops consuming, never stops waiting. And once you've heard what whispers inside, you can't silence it. I used to take pride in this job, in being the steady hand, the calm voice that reassured hikers and campers that they were safe, that the wilderness was beautiful but manageable, that the risks were natural and predictable. A bear might wander too close, a storm might catch you unprepared, but those were dangers you could understand, prepare for, survive. Now I feel like a liar, because what lives out there isn't predictable. It doesn't follow the rules of nature. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't give you a chance to fight back. It waits, it studies, it chooses. And when it chooses you, no uniform, no badge, no firearm can protect you. There are nights when I still hear the whistle. Not always close, not always clear, but enough to know it hasn't forgotten me. Enough to know it's still there. Watching, deciding. And here's the truth that keeps me awake. I don't think it wants to kill me. Not yet. If it did, it would have done it in that cave or in the fog with its eyes glinting all around me. No, what it wants is worse. It wants me to know, to carry the weight of its existence, to feel the silence press against me every time I step into the woods. It wants me to live with the certainty that reason is fragile and that out there, just past the edge of the firelight, there are things we cannot explain and cannot stop. Some days I wonder if that's its way of marking me. If every ranger, every hunter, every lost hiker who's ever stared too long into the dark has felt the same weight. If the woods are filled not just with whispers of those who vanished, but with the thoughts of those who came back broken, carrying knowledge too heavy to share. I think about the boy sometimes, about his parents, who must have been told the same story we tell everyone, that he wandered too far, that the forest is vast, that sometimes people disappear without a trace. And I wonder, would it be kinder to tell them the truth, or would it destroy them? The silence answers for me. No one would believe it anyway. Not really. Not until they see the eyes, not until they hear the breath, not until the whistle follows them through the fog. And so I keep walking the trails, keep wearing the uniform, keep pretending. I tell families they're safe. I show children how to track deer, how to listen for birds. I smile, and I hide the part of me that waits for the knock on the door at night, because that's what it comes down to, that knock. It's not just a memory anymore. It's a promise, a reminder that when the time comes, it won't take me without warning. It'll give me that sound, that final signal that it's here, that it's chosen, that the game is over. Until then, I am left with silence, with the memory of a cave that breathes, of fog that hides eyes, of a forest that holds its secrets tighter than any human hand ever could. And maybe that's the lesson, the only one worth sharing. The woods are not ours. They never were. They are older than our maps, stronger than our laws, and filled with things that do not care about our reason or our survival. We walk them as guests. Some are allowed to leave, some are not. And when my time comes, when the whistle calls me back, when the knock echoes through the cabin door, I will step into the silence knowing this: the forest always collects its due. There's a part of me that wonders if speaking this aloud is its own kind of betrayal, like dragging something from the dark that was never meant to see the light. But maybe that's the only way I'll ever make sense of it. To give shape to the silence that's been eating at me. To admit that no matter how much I try to bury it beneath paperwork, trail maps, or the neat little still here now to grieving families, the truth keeps clawing its way back. Ravensmaw. It isn't just rock and shadow, it's a mirror. A wound that shows you what lies beneath the skin of reason, beneath the thin veneer we call civilization. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Those gouges in the stone, those bones piled like forgotten prayers, that single shoe half sunk in dirt. And more than anything, I feel it. that breath pressing against me, slow and deliberate, as though the cave itself were alive and deciding whether to let me go. And I ask myself, why me? Why did I walk away when others didn't? Was it luck, mercy, or was it punishment in its own way to be left carrying the knowledge, branded by it? I think about that night when I saw not one set of eyes but three watching me from the fog, and I know the answer. It wasn't mercy, it was ownership. A reminder that once you've been seen, once you've been marked, you never really walk away. That's the part that breaks me more than anything, the fragility of reason. All my training, all my years spent cataloging trails, teaching hikers about safety, writing reports with clean explanations, none of it mattered when the dark closed in. Out there, reason is a thin thread. Snap it, and what rushes in is older, deeper, merciless. Out there, the forest doesn't care about what's believable. It only cares about what's true. And the truth is this: there are things here that are bigger than us. That's why the cave lingers in my mind as more than just a place. It's a symbol of the secrets we bury, the things we deny until they tear their way out. A cavern where silence grows teeth, a mouth that devours every certainty you've built your life on. And once you've stood at its threshold, you can't return unchanged. I've tried. God knows I've tried. I still lace up my boots, still nod to families as they pass with their backpacks and coolers, still smile as kids ask me where they can see deer. But behind that smile, there's a fracture. I walk the same paths I once loved, and now every bend feels like an ambush, every shadow like an open hand reaching for me. The woods didn't change. I did. Yet even in that fear, there's something else. A strange, quiet awe. Because for all the terror, all the sleepless nights, there's no denying what I felt out there was real. I looked into the dark and saw proof that the world is vaster, stranger, more terrible than I ever allowed myself to believe. That terrifies me, but it also humbles me. People think rangers are protectors, that we stand between them and the dangers of the wild, and maybe in some ways we do. But the longer I live with this, the more I realize the truth is the opposite. We're not the guardians. We're the witnesses. The ones who see the edges fray, who carry the knowledge that some places are not ours to control. Sometimes I wonder how I'll be remembered when I'm gone. Will people say I was a good ranger? Will they say I served, that I cared, that I kept people safe? Or will they never know what I saw, what I carried in silence because I buried it too deep to ever be written down? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the legacy isn't in the stories we leave behind, but in the choices we make with the knowledge we carry. And my choice, the only one I have left, is to keep walking those trails, even when the silence presses too heavy, to keep smiling at families, even when I hear the whistle threading through the fog, to keep showing up, even knowing that one night the knock will come, because maybe that's the only way we survive in the face of what we can't explain, not by pretending it isn't there, not by fighting it, but by walking forward anyway, by admitting that the woods are older than us, stronger than us, filled with secrets that will never belong to us, and choosing to walk into them with open eyes. The cave is still there. The forest still waits. And one day, I know it will claim me, as it claims us all in time. But until then, I'll carry its memory. I'll carry the silence. I'll carry the fragility of reason like a wound I can't close. And when the knock comes, when the breath curls against my ear, when the eyes glint once more in the dark, I'll step into it without running. Because I'll know what so many never do. The forest does not belong to us. We belong to it. And in the end, all it ever does is take back what was already its own. The first time I heard the forest whisper my name, I told myself it was only the wind threading through the pines. But deep down, I knew better. The trees don't lie. They bend, they break, they creak. But they don't call out like a man, like not with syllables, not with that hungry pull at the edge of hearing. My name didn't belong in that darkness. And yet it echoed there, rolling low from the ridge as if the whole mountain exhaled my secret back at me. My name is Daniel Holt. 46 years old, 23 of those as a ranger in Washington's Cascades. I know these woods like some men know their children. I've walked the ridges when they're washed in morning light, and I've walked them when the moon hangs thin and hard as a blade. And over the years, I've learned that the forest holds memories better than people do. It keeps what dies within it. The land remembers every footstep, every scream, every secret, and sometimes it gives them back. I didn't start out afraid. A ranger can't afford to be. My job was to guide, to protect, to enforce the rules of survival for the tourists who thought wilderness was nothing more than scenery. Most nights were quiet. You hear owls, maybe coyotes, sometimes the distant crash of a tree losing its fight with gravity. And yet, scattered across the years, there were nights that were different, nights that clawed into me and never let go. The first came the summer of my 3rd year. The fire season was brutal, dry lightning setting the ridges ablaze, smoke turning the sky to bruised purple. I was stationed near a lake, monitoring campers, making sure nobody lit a spark. That evening, as the sun folded into the peaks, I walked down to the shoreline. The water was black glass, the smell of resin heavy in the air. That's when I heard it, a knock. 3 sharp raps, rhythmic, hollow. At first, I thought it was woodpeckers. But the sound wasn't on the trees, it was under the dock. I stepped closer, boots echoing. Another 3 knocks, louder now. I crouched, peered beneath, only water lapping, shadows tangled like weeds. I told myself it was nothing, some trick of the lake. But as I turned, I caught sight of the campers, 2 kids staring, their faces pale. "You heard it too?" I asked. One nodded. It was knocking like someone trapped. That night, none of us slept. The knocks came again, spaced through the hours, always 3, always hollow. I tried to reason it away, maybe a log shifting against the pilings, maybe fish. But when dawn came and the fog lifted, I found something scraped into the wet wood beneath the dock. Fingernail marks. Dozens, deep enough to split the grain. They weren't new. They weren't old. They were waiting. I didn't report it. What would I have said? That the lake had been knocking back? No, I buried it inside, told myself it was nothing. But the forest has a way of circling back to those who lie to themselves. Years later, another night tested me. I was assigned to an isolated sector near Mount Baker, dense timber, steep trails, old caves. Locals warned me about them, said the caves weren't meant for men, that they held things better left untouched. I smiled, nodded, wrote it off as mountain talk. But there's a truth hidden in folklore, a pulse under the words. It was late September, the air sharp, the forest slick with rain. A hiker had gone missing, so I pushed deeper into the ridges, searching. By dusk, the trail was a bruise of mud under my boots, and the only sound was water dripping from fur to fur. That's when I smelled it, a sour metallic stench, like blood left too long in the sun. It curled into my nose, thick, unmistakable. I followed, telling myself I had to, that maybe the missing man was injured. The stench led me to a cave mouth gaping black against the slope. Cold air seeped out like the breath of a buried thing. I called his name, voice swallowed whole. The echo came back wrong, bent, drawn out, syllables stretched into something unfamiliar. Still, I went in. The cave was slick, walls sweating, my flashlight a pale spear in the dark. The smell grew heavier, pressing against me, coating my tongue. I pressed on until I heard it, the shuffle of feet on stone. Relief surged. I wasn't alone. But when I called out again, the shuffle stopped. Silence. And then, faintly, the whisper of my name. My heart hammered, my rational mind scrambling. Maybe the hiker. Maybe delirious. But the voice wasn't weak, wasn't desperate. It was steady, deliberate, like someone who already knew me. I turned back. I don't know how long I ran, only that I didn't stop until the night split open with the sight of my truck headlights waiting on the ridge road. I never found the hiker. They never found his body either. The report said probable fall, exposure. But I know what I heard. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps, it threads, it coils. I carried that cave in me for years, locked behind duty and denial. But the forest remembers, and it doesn't let you go so easily. There were other nights Nights where the air changed before the storm, thick with static, every hair on my arms rising as if the forest itself bristled. Nights where the deer moved in herds too close, their eyes reflecting back something more human than they should. And the night when I saw the figure. I was patrolling a trailhead long after midnight, checking for illegal fires. The forest was ink, the stars drowned by cloud. My beam cut the dark, white and thin, when it caught movement on the switchback above. A man, or so I thought, tall, shoulders broad, hair matted against pale skin. He moved slow, deliberate. I called out, "Sir, park's closed. You need to head back down." No answer. I climbed after him, boots grinding stone, my light jittering with my breath. But when I reached the bend, the trail was empty. No tracks, no sound, only the smell of wet stone and pine. Then I heard it again, 3 knocks, hollow, from the trees themselves this time, pulsing through the trunks like a heartbeat. That night, I didn't sleep either. Looking back now, I wonder if these encounters weren't separate stories at all, but chapters in one truth the forest had been telling me all along. That what lies hidden beneath the soil, in the caves, in the water, isn't just nature, but memory. And memory hungers. The forest doesn't forget. And when you spend enough years among its shadows, you stop forgetting too. Every sound, every trace of movement, every odd turn of the wind lodges inside you, cataloged against your will. You try to keep order, to tell yourself which things can be explained and which can't. But sometimes the lines blur, and you're left wondering if you've been carrying the woods inside your skull all along. It was winter when the next story unfolded, a season that strips the Cascades down to silence. Snow swallows the trails, the firs bend heavy with white, and the whole mountain seems to hold its breath. It's supposed to be a dead time, a time when the wild things hibernate, and the only sound is the snap of frozen branches. But that year, the silence was wrong. I'd been tasked with monitoring a backcountry cabin, one of those emergency shelters built decades ago for rangers and trapped hikers. Old log work, iron stove, a cot that creaked when you set a pack on it. I skied in alone, expecting solitude, the kind of solitude that wears into your bones until you start hearing your own pulse louder than the wind. But what I found waiting unsettled me from the first night. At dusk, I built a fire, melted snow for water, and tried to let the warmth sink into me. The cabin smelled of pitch and dust, the kind of scent that tells you it stood long enough to outlast storms you'll never see. I was half dozing when I heard the first creak above, not the roof timbers. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as if someone were walking the loft I knew wasn't there. I froze, stared up at the rafters. Nothing. But the sound came again, this time crossing the cabin, heel to toe, weight pressing down the boards overhead. My throat went dry. The cabin had no second floor, no loft, just roof. I grabbed my flashlight, swung it across the ceiling. The light trembled, dust motes spinning in its beam. Empty. But the sound didn't stop. It circled, steady as breath, until it reached the corner and fell silent. The silence was worse than the noise. It pressed in like waiting eyes. I told myself I was tired. Too many hours on skis. Auditory hallucinations aren't rare in isolation. I clung to that thought like rope on a cliff. But later, when the fire guttered low and the cold settled hard, I smelled something that broke my denial. Wet earth, as if the cabin walls were seeping soil, the musk of freshly dug ground. It didn't belong there. I tried not to sleep, but exhaustion is a predator that always wins. When I woke, the fire was ash and the cabin door was open. Snow drifted in, clean, sharp, untouched except for a single line of prints. Bare feet. They led from the doorway to the cot where I lay, and then they stopped. Not turned around, not faded, just stopped, as if the person had stepped into me. I left that cabin at first light, radioed in a maintenance request, never explained why. Some things you don't put in official reports. Some things you keep locked in the marrow. The years rolled on, my hair grayed. The rookies started looking at me like I carried some unspoken knowledge, as if I had answers I'd never give. But the truth is, I carried nothing but questions. The forest doesn't gift answers. It teaches by hunger, by stripping you down until you see what's left of yourself. And then came the assignment that cracked me open. It was spring, early melt, rivers fat with snow melt, and trails slick as oil. We had a missing teenager, a boy who'd wandered from his campsite near a gorge. His parents swore they'd only looked away for minutes. We've all heard that before. The woods measure minutes differently. I took the lead, hiked into the gorge as the sun slid down the cliffs. The roar of water filled everything, drowning my thoughts. We combed the banks, called his name, blew whistles that disappeared into spray. Nothing. Then, just as dusk painted the river steel, I saw it. A shape on the opposite bank. Not the boy. Taller, shoulders like stone, arms too long, standing still against the birches, its head tilted, watching. I froze, bile rising in my throat. The other rangers hadn't seen. Their eyes were on the ground, their shouts tearing the air, but I knew if I spoke, if I pointed, it would vanish, and they'd think I'd broken under the strain. So I stayed silent, staring across the water. And then it bent down, scooped something from the earth, and held it high. A shoe. Small, mud-caked. The boy's. I stepped forward, heart racing, but the thing dropped the shoe into the current. The river swallowed it, tore it away downstream. When I looked back to the far bank, the figure was gone. We never found the boy. His parents left with nothing but grief. And me. I carried the image of that long-armed figure, the way it mocked us with proof, as if the forest itself had claimed him. Nights after, I dreamed of rivers rushing through my cabin, cold water climbing my bedposts, voices tumbling in the current. Every dream ended with the same whisper, not lost, taken. The hardest part of being a ranger isn't the storms, the predators, or even the loneliness. It's the knowing. The knowing that sometimes the forest takes and does not return. That you'll stand before grieving families with empty hands while something unseen walks away smiling. Over time, the stories I'd locked inside me began to unravel, thread by thread. A knock under the dock. A cave that spoke my name. Bare footprints ending at my bed. A figure holding a child's shoe. Different places, different years, yet all circling the same dark truth. The forest remembers, but not as we do. It remembers hunger, it remembers blood, and it remembers names. Because last autumn, on the ridge above Diablo Lake, it called mine again. The ridge above Diablo Lake is not a place for voices. It's jagged, windswept, the kind of ground where sound scatters and vanishes into distance. And yet, standing there that autumn evening, I heard my name as clearly as if someone had leaned close to my ear. The sky was bruised purple with sunset, the water below catching the last light like molten glass. I had gone up there to check the overlook, a routine task. Tourists like to linger too long, sometimes left trash behind. But the ridge was empty, completely. No hikers, no campers, not even the usual ravens that haunted the cliffs. And still I heard it, my name, pulled thin and low, riding the air, not shouted, whispered, as if the lake itself had exhaled it. I froze, hand tightening on the strap of my pack. It came again, this time from behind. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through furze, stunted by the wind. Nothing. The ridge was barren stone and bending trees. My pulse hammered so hard it blurred my vision. You learn to trust your instincts in the forest. The hairs on my arms were standing, the way they do before lightning splits the sky. Instinct said I wasn't alone. Reason said I was. That was the moment the divide opened inside me, the fracture I've never been able to close. I started down the trail, boots scraping rock, breath loud in my ears. Every step I expected to hear another behind me, to feel the weight of unseen eyes. When I reached the tree line, the forest swallowed the last of the light. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Not campfire smoke, not pine crackling. This was bitter, acrid, like hair burning. It drifted thick between the trunks, clinging to my clothes. My throat tightened. I scanned the dark, searching for flames, but there were none. Only the smell saturating the night. And then came the knocks. 3, just as before. Hollow, deliberate, echoing through the trees. My knees almost gave. The sound was following me now, carrying across years, across places. The knocks weren't bound to the dock or the cabin. They were bound to me. I forced myself down to the lake road, back to my truck. The headlights cut a shaky path through the dark. When I looked in the mirror, for a split second, I swore I saw a face sitting in the bed of the truck. White, expressionless, staring. By the time I twisted around, it was gone. That night, I sat in my ranger cabin with the lights on, every lamp burning, the silence thick as stone, and I asked myself a question I'd never dared before. Was I losing my mind? The official reports never mention madness, but unofficially, rangers talk. We talk about the ones who wander too deep, who start hearing voices or following lights in the night. We call it the forest's toll. Most quit before it consumes them. Some don't. I began to notice little things slipping, keys not where I left them, maps gone from my desk, radios picking up static at night that seemed to form words just beyond hearing. I told myself it was stress, age, too many years breathing mountain air. But deep down, I knew. The forest was tightening its grip. One morning, I woke to find mud on my boots, thick, fresh, clinging in patterns I didn't recognize. I hadn't left the cabin that night, or at least I thought I hadn't. But the footprints outside said otherwise. Bare feet again, circling the cabin, crossing, doubling back as if something had danced in the dirt. The prints were small this time, child-sized. I stood there at dawn, breath clouding in the cold, staring at those prints. A memory rose like rot through water. The boy who vanished, his shoe held high across the river. The forest wasn't just remembering him, it was delivering him back, piece by piece, through me. That day, I tried to resign. Walked straight into the office, laid my badge on the desk. But the supervisor, a man with skin as weathered as bark, just shook his head. We don't quit, Holt. We fade. You know that. I walked out without another word. But the badge was still in my pocket. The next weeks blurred. I patrolled as ordered, but every shadow seemed to lean toward me. Every gust of wind carried the suggestion of my name. Nights brought the smell of wet earth inside the cabin again, no matter how many times I scrubbed the floor. I began to dread sleep because the dreams always ended the same way. Me standing in front of a cave, black and bottomless, something breathing just beyond sight. And then came the cave itself. A rescue call. 2 hikers lost near the old mines east of Baker. I volunteered, though part of me knew I shouldn't have. Knew where it would lead. We found the trail of the first hiker quickly, boot prints veering off into the scree. We followed until the earth opened beneath us. A cave mouth, jagged, yawning. The prints led straight inside. I told the others I'd go first. My voice sounded steady. My hands were shaking. Inside, the cave was damp, cold, a draft pressing against my face like a living thing. The beam of my flashlight jittered across stone etched with marks, scratches, spirals, gouges that looked almost like writing. My chest tightened. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened with that metallic stench. Then from the dark a whisper, Daniel. I froze. My lungs locked. I swung the light. For a heartbeat I saw them, shapes half-formed, clinging to the stone like shadows made flesh. Faces pale and eyeless, mouths moving soundlessly until one spoke my name again. Louder this time. I stumbled back, hit the wall, my light flickered, then steadied on the ground, and there it was. A shoe. Small, mud-caked, too familiar. The others found me outside, gasping in the daylight, clutching the shoe like it was the only thing keeping me tethered. They asked what happened. I told them nothing. Nothing they'd believe. But I know. The forest doesn't lose. It waits, it circles, it takes, and now it has taken me. The shoe sat on my desk for weeks. I told myself I'd turn it in, log it as evidence, file the paperwork like we always do. But I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't just leather and laces. It was a message, and every time I looked at it, I could feel the forest watching through the window, waiting to see what I'd do. That winter came early. Heavy snow buried the ridges by late October. Branches sagged under white weight, and silence pressed over everything like a shroud. Nights stretched long, and in that hush, I started hearing them more clearly. Not just whispers anymore. Footfalls outside the cabin. Slow, deliberate circling. Always circling. I would sit inside with my rifle across my knees, breath clouding in the lamplight, listening as something walked just beyond the door. But no knock ever came. Not until one night when it did, 3 times. Hollow, steady, the same rhythm I'd heard at the lake, in the trees, in my dreams. My heart stopped, my throat closed. I rose slowly, rifle in hand, and called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then the knock again, not on the door this time, but on the window. I spun, lamplight trembling, and there it was, something pale against the glass. A face. 2 large, pressed flat, eyes dark and wide, unblinking. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it slipped back into the dark, and the snow swallowed its tracks before I could reach the door. That was the night I knew it wasn't just whispers, wasn't just memory. Something was out there, alive, walking, hunting. I began asking questions quietly, carefully. Old loggers, retired trappers, elders from the towns clinging to the forest edge. Most shut their mouths tight. Some muttered words I'd only half heard before. Wild men, the watchers, those that take. One old woman spat in the fire and said, "The caves don't stay empty. They breathe, and what breathes remembers." It sounded like folklore, but the way her eyes darted to the tree line told me it wasn't just story. Weeks later, another disappearance pulled me deeper. A hunter, mid-50s, gone missing near the high ridges. His friends swore they'd split for only an hour. They returned to find his rifle leaned against a tree, his pack zipped tight, but no sign of him. The snow around was untouched, no prints, no drag marks, just absence, as if he'd been lifted clean from the earth. We searched. Day after day, we searched. Nothing. On the last evening, as the others packed up camp, I lingered at the tree where the rifle had been found. The forest was still, snow hanging in the branches, the air bitter enough to crack your lips. That's when I heard it, low, guttural, almost a growl. But it formed into words. Not my name this time. Another. The hunters. Spoken once, then swallowed by silence. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. Tall. Broader than any man, shoulders hunched forward, hair matted and hanging in dark ropes. Its face was wrong, not beast, not man. Something between. Its mouth opened, and the sound that came out rattled my bones, the same 3 knocks, but drawn from its chest, resonant, as if it carried wood inside its lungs. For one breathless instant, we stared at each other. Then it stepped back, vanishing into the first without a sound. Snow didn't crunch beneath it, branches didn't break, it simply moved through. I didn't tell the others what I saw. What could I have said? That the missing man wasn't lost but claimed? That the forest itself, through this creature, was keeping count? That night, by the fire, I remembered the boy's shoe, the bare prints, the cave. Every thread led back to the same loom. Something ancient, something human-shaped but not human, living parallel to us in the dark veins of the forest. A yeti, the word some whispered like a curse. But I knew it was more than that. Not just flesh, but memory wrapped in muscle. A keeper of the lost. Sleep became dangerous after that. Each dream drew me closer to the cave. I'd see myself walking down into its mouth, no light, only breathing around me, warm and damp. And in those dreams I'd hear voices, the missing boy, the hunter, others I'd long forgotten. All of them calling, all of them saying the same thing, "You're next." I stopped resisting after a while. Something in me, worn down by years of silence and denial, wanted to know, wanted to see. So one night, I followed the whispers. The forest was thick with fog. Moonlight shredded across the branches. I walked without a map, without a trail, guided only by the low hum of my name carried on the wind. My boots sank into moss that felt too soft, too alive, pulsing under each step. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time bends out there like the trees are folding it. And then I found it. The cave. The same mouth I'd fled years before, now yawning wider, rimmed with ice, breath spilling cold across the ground. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Inside, the dark was total. My flashlight beam swallowed like a drop of water in the sea. The air pressed close, wet and warm, smelling of rot and stone. My steps echoed, but so did others. Shuffling, dragging, moving in rhythm with mine. I raised my light, and for one heartbeat the walls shimmered as if slick with eyes, hundreds of them, unblinking, staring. Then they were gone. Deeper I went, until I heard it. Not a whisper, not a knock, a roar. Deep, guttural, tearing through stone, it shook the ground, rattled the air, my legs nearly gave, and then it stepped into the beam. Taller than the cave ceiling, hunched to fit, hair thick as moss, eyes like pits. Its breath steamed, smelling of earth and blood. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It leaned forward, mouth splitting wide, and when it spoke, it wasn't in growls, it was in words, my voice. Daniel. I staggered back, the light flickering in my hand. The creature straightened, filling the cave, and all around me the walls began to knock. 3 beats, over and over, like the pulse of the mountain itself. I don't remember leaving. Only waking on the ridge, dawn spilling thin across the snow, my boots soaked, my rifle gone. The others never asked why I came back empty. They've learned not to. But I know. I didn't escape. Not really. Because even now, sitting here, I can hear it. 3 knocks, hollow, steady, and a voice, mine but not mine, whispering from the dark. The forest doesn't lose, Daniel. The forest keeps. I tell myself it was a dream, that I never went into the cave, that I never heard my own voice crawling out of the throat of something not meant for daylight. But every morning since, I wake with mud under my fingernails. Some mornings there are pine needles tangled in my hair. And once, a stone clenched in my hand, black and slick, as if pulled from deep underground. I don't sleep right anymore. The forest doesn't wait for sleep to come. It seeps through the walls, through the cracks in the window frame, through the thin glass of my lantern. Every night, the knocking begins, sometimes at the door, sometimes beneath the floorboards, like something crawling through the foundation of the cabin, tapping up from the dirt. Always 3 knocks. Always the same rhythm. It's not only knocks now, sometimes it's breathing, heavy, ragged, as if some huge chest is pressed against the wall just outside. Once I swore I felt the boards bow inward, like ribs straining under weight. I should leave, I know that. A sane man would pack his things, drive until the mountains are a rumor in the rearview mirror, but I can't. The forest has its hooks in me, and the truth is I don't want to leave anymore. It isn't curiosity, it's compulsion. A gravity stronger than duty, stronger than fear. The rangers talk about me less these days. They see the lines deepening on my face, the way my hands tremble when I pour coffee. They don't ask questions. They've seen others walk this path before, the ones who fade. But the thing that drags me down isn't just the forest. It's what it's showing me. Images, flickers at the edges of vision, too sharp to be dreams. A boy standing barefoot in the snow, lips blue, eyes hollow. The hunter bent double, mouth open as if mid-scream, his ribs protruding like the bars of a cage. A woman I've never seen, hair wet and hanging, crawling across the floor of my cabin in the dark. I never smell smoke anymore. I smell soil, freshly turned, damp, clinging to me even when I've never touched the ground. The scent of a grave opened too soon. Last week, something shifted. I woke to silence. Not the silence of absence, but of waiting. And then from the tree line, I heard voices, not whispers, not 1 or 2, a chorus. Dozens, layered, rising and falling in a rhythm older than words. I staggered outside, rifle in hand, and the sound stopped. Dead. The snow was unbroken, the trees still. Only the knock came then, faint, far away, rolling up from the ground beneath me. I fell to my knees, palms against the frozen dirt, and felt it tremble. Not like an earthquake, like something huge shifting below, stretching, waking. That was when I realized the cave isn't just a place, it's a mouth, and the knocks aren't signals, they're a heartbeat. Since then, I've been waiting for it to open again, waiting for the ground to split, for the forest to finally speak its whole truth. I know it will, because every night the knocks grow closer together. Not 3, then silence. 3, then 3 again, faster, harder, like something quickening. I've stopped carrying the radio. I've stopped writing in the logbook. Paper, words, rules, they belong to the world outside. In here, only memory matters, and memory doesn't fade. But last night I saw it clearly. The fog rolled in thick, swallowing the ridge, muffling even my own breathing. I lit the lantern, its glow barely pushing through the white. And then I saw movement. Figures, dozens, emerging one by one from the trees. Their shapes bent, some tall, some twisted, but all walking with the same heavy gait. Their eyes glowed faint, like coals buried deep. They formed a circle around the cabin. Silent. Watching. I stood frozen at the window, rifle shaking in my grip. Then one stepped forward, taller than the rest, shoulders broad, head nearly brushing the low branches. It knocked. Once on the wall, once on the glass, once on the door. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then it leaned close to the window, so close I could see my own reflection warped in its eyes. And when it opened its mouth, I heard my own voice again, clear, calm. Come back to the cave. I staggered away, crashing into the table, the lantern tipping, light sputtering. When I looked back, the window was empty. The circle gone, only the prints remained, pressed deep in the snow, circling the cabin like a noose. I didn't sleep. I sat with the rifle across my knees until dawn, waiting for the sun to tell me I hadn't lost my mind. But when I opened the door, the prints weren't in the snow anymore. They were inside, leading across the floor to my bed. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The cave is calling, louder now. Each day, each hour, it fills my ears like blood rushing. I know that when I finally go back, I won't come out. Not as myself. Maybe not at all. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the forest doesn't want me to guard it anymore. Maybe it wants me to join it, to become part of the memory it keeps, to add my name to the whispers that haunt the trees. And if that's true, then I wonder how many rangers before me have gone the same way. How many of us never retired, never faded, but were taken, folded into the woods, changed into something else. When the cave opens again, I'll go. I know I will, because the knocks don't stop. And because, in the quiet between them, I can hear the forest breathing with me. The days blurred after that night. I patrolled, yes, but not the way I used to. My body walked the trails, checked the signs, wrote the reports, but my mind stayed in the cave. Every sound was a summons. Every shadow bent toward the same dark mouth beneath the mountain. I'd wake from shallow dreams with my boots already laced, my coat on, as if I had risen in the night and dressed without memory. One evening, as the sun bled across the ridges, I gave up resisting. I packed no food, no compass, no radio. Only the lantern and my rifle, though I knew neither would save me. The forest guided me without hesitation, every tree angled like a signpost, every gust of wind pushing me forward. I walked until the stars burned sharp in the black sky, until the fog rose thick enough to hide the moon. And there it was, the cave. Wider than I remembered, rimmed with frost, exhaling breath so cold it bit my lungs. I stood at the threshold for a long time, the rifle heavy in my hands. My knees trembled, not just from fear, but from recognition. This was where it had all led. The knocks, the whispers, the faces in the snow. They hadn't been scattered hauntings. They'd been the same story told over and over, pulling me here like threads in a web. I stepped inside. The dark swallowed me whole. My lantern sputtered, its glow a frail bubble against walls that sweated black. The air was thick, damp, humming with a low vibration that sank into my bones. My boots slid on slick stone, every step an echo that seemed to multiply, as if 100 others were walking with me, just out of sight. Deeper, always deeper. The knocks came from within now, not outside. 3 beats, reverberating through the stone, steady as a heart. My chest ached in rhythm with it, my pulse sinking until I couldn't tell if the sound was mine or the mountains. The passage opened into a chamber so vast my light could barely touch its ceiling. The air shifted, warmer, fouler, carrying the stench of rot and iron. And then the voices rose. Not whispers, not echoes. Full, strong, layered. Men, women, children, all calling names. Hundreds of names, overlapping, weaving into one endless chorus. And then they said mine, all at once, 100 mouths shaping Daniel. The sound slammed through me like a wave, dropping me to my knees. I clutched the lantern, its glass rattling, my teeth chattering, though sweat down my spine. Something moved in the dark. At first, I thought it was the walls themselves shifting, bulging, breathing. Then the shapes emerged, tall, hulking, shoulders bent, arms long, dozens of them stepping slow, surrounding me in a circle like the one I'd seen outside my cabin. Their eyes glowed faint in the lantern light, pale, wet, endless. One stepped forward, the tallest, its head brushing the chamber's ceiling, its hair hung in matted ropes, its face half shadow, half something too human to dismiss. When it opened its mouth, the sound out was mine. My voice. My voice. You came back. My throat closed. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, to scream, but nothing left me. My own voice echoed back from that mouth, calm, steady, unbroken. You belong. I staggered to my feet, rifle shaking in my hands. My lantern flickered, dimmed, leaving the chamber a sea of shadows. All around me, the figures pressed closer, their feet silent on the stone. My pulse roared in my ears. No, I rasped, though it came out a whisper. I don't. The thing tilted its head, eyes narrowing, and then it raised its hand, fingers long, claws chipped like stone. It knocked. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound boomed through the chamber, rattling the walls, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. The others joined in, every figure pounding their fists against the stone. 3 beats. 3 beats. The rhythm of the earth itself. I screamed. Raised the rifle, fired into the mass. The blast shattered the dark, echoing like thunder. Figures jerked, dissolved into shadow, reformed again. The bullet clattered to the stone. Useless. The lantern gave out then, like plunging me into total dark. But I still saw them, their eyes, their faces, their mouths opening in silence until, all at once, the chamber erupted with one final roar. Not words, not knocks, a howl, a scream of something older than men, older than caves, older than memory itself. It ripped through me, tore my lungs raw, drove me to the ground with hands clamped over my ears, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The chamber empty. My rifle gone, my lantern shattered. Only the faint sound of water dripping, steady as a clock. I crawled out of that cave, hands raw, knees bleeding, lungs burning with cold air. Dawn was breaking by the time I reached the ridge. The forest stood silent, still, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Because when I staggered to my cabin and caught my reflection in the window, I saw eyes that weren't mine staring back. Pale, endless, watching. I haven't lit a lantern since that night. I'm afraid of what the light will show me. The dark feels safer now, though I know that's a lie. It's in the dark that the forest moves most freely. It's in the dark that it speaks. I keep catching my reflection in places I shouldn't. A window, the surface of still water, a piece of glass in the ranger station. Always too pale, too hollow-eyed, the skin sagging in ways I don't recognize. Sometimes the mouth moves when mine doesn't, shaping words I can't hear. Once, I leaned close to the window pane and the reflection leaned closer too, but a fraction faster than me, like it wanted to arrive first. I haven't told anyone. What would I say? That the forest is wearing me like a mask? That every time I blink, I see the cave walls breathing? The other rangers would write me off as cracked, another old man slipping into madness, and maybe they'd be right. But there's something worse than madness. Certainty. It began when I found the notebook, my notebook. At least it looked like mine. Same black cover, same ranger insignia. Only the writing inside wasn't mine. Page after page filled with names, dates, places. Missing hikers, campers who never returned, rangers who left and never came back. Names I knew, names I didn't. And then, my name. Written over and over, the ink darker, pressed deeper, until the page was nearly torn through. I flipped further, hands shaking. There were sketches too. The dock, the cabin, the cave, all places I'd been, all marked with symbols, spirals, eyes, 3 parallel lines. I didn't draw them, and yet the handwriting was mine. I burned the notebook in the stove that night, watching the pages curl black. But when I woke the next morning, it was back on the desk, unmarked, waiting. That's when I stopped trying to deny it. The forest wasn't just circling me anymore. It was inside me, writing through me, watching from behind my eyes. The voices grew louder after that, not whispers, but conversations, like 1,000 people murmuring at once. I couldn't make out words, only the swell and fall of tones, but they pressed against me like water against glass, threatening to shatter. At night, I'd hear them clearly, calling out from the tree line, some familiar, some not. The boy, the hunter, the woman with wet hair, all of them speaking through the same mouth. And then one evening a knock came from inside the cabin. 3 beats from the closet door. My stomach turned to ice. I raised the rifle, every nerve screaming, and stepped closer. Another 3 knocks, louder now, shaking the wood. I gripped the handle, breath ragged, sweat soaking my shirt. And then silence. When I pulled the door open, there was nothing but darkness. And yet the smell hit me instantly. Damp soil. Rot. The smell of graves. I slammed it shut, chest heaving. But the knock came again. Not from the closet. From under the bed. I don't remember the hours that followed. Only that when dawn came, I was lying on the floor with soil under my nails again, the bed shoved aside as if something had crawled out from beneath. The Rangers stopped sending me on assignments after that. Said I needed rest. Said I'd been working too long, carrying too much. Maybe they thought they were helping. But solitude is worse. In silence, the voices swell until they're all I can hear. Sometimes I catch myself talking back. Sometimes I answer. I don't think I'm alone anymore, even when I look around and see no one. I feel them in the cabin with me, just at the edge of sight. Shadows bending wrong, air shifting without cause, and at night when I wake suddenly I know why. I hear breathing beside me. Slow, deep, matching mine until it overtakes it. The worst part isn't the fear anymore, it's the recognition. When I see the pale face in the window, when I hear the knock, when I smell the earth rising through the floorboards, I don't feel like it's something foreign. I feel like it's a memory, like I've been here before. What if I've always been here? What if the cave didn't take me that night because it already had me? Sometimes I wonder if the years I remember, the boy, the hunter, the cabin, weren't mine at all. What if I've just been carrying them? What if that's what we are, all of us who serve the forest too long? Vessels, pages in its endless book, names written and erased over and over. I tried to leave last week, drove down the mountain road until the trees thinned, until I could see the edge of town. But when I looked in the mirror, my reflection wasn't in the driver's seat, it was in the back, smiling. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding, and when I turned around, the seat was empty. But when I looked forward again, I was back at the cabin. The forest had folded the road, twisted it, delivered me where it wanted. That was the night I stopped fighting. Because maybe the forest doesn't need protectors. Maybe it never did. Maybe it only ever needed witnesses. And now I'm not even sure if I'm Daniel Holt anymore. Maybe I'm just the echo of him, a shadow pulled out of the cave, walking until the knocks call me back for good. And if that's true, then I think the only choice left is how long I'll resist before I step fully into the memory. Because the forest is patient. The forest always wins. The last dawn I remember didn't feel like dawn at all. The sky was ash gray, the light thin and brittle like something breaking instead of rising. I sat on the cabin steps with the rifle across my knees, though I knew it was no weapon against what was coming. The forest was too quiet. Not a single bird, not a single breath of wind. Just the waiting. And then as the pale light stretched across the ridges, I heard it. Not from the trees this time. Not from the ground. From inside me. 3 knocks. Deep, steady, drumming through my ribs like they were hollow wood. I doubled over, clutching my chest, gasping. It wasn't fear anymore. It was inevitability. I staggered to my feet. My boots found the trail without me thinking. The forest guided me, as it always had, down through the trees, across frozen streams, over roots that seemed to pull back from my steps. Hours blurred into minutes. My breath smoked in the air, my skin damp with cold sweat. And then I was there. The cave, wider than before, hungrier. Its mouth rhymed with frost, the ground before it trembling faintly like lungs drawing breath. I stood at the threshold, chest heaving, knowing this was the end of the path. Not death, not life, something else. The knocks came again, not outside this time, but within me, rattling my bones. I stepped forward. The dark swallowed me whole. My hands shook, my lantern long gone, but I didn't need it anymore. The cave glowed faintly on its own, the walls slick with a strange light like wet stone catching moonshine. Shadows moved, but they weren't mine. They bent wrong, crawling sideways, slipping across the walls without bodies to cast them. Deeper. always deeper. The voices rose again. A chorus, a tide, each one shaping names. Hundreds, thousands, some I recognized, some I didn't, but all pressing together, rising until they all said mine. Daniel. 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 I stumbled into a vast chamber, larger than any I'd seen, and in the center, the thing waited. It was taller than I remembered, broader than any tree, its body half shrouded in hair, half carved from stone. Its eyes were pits, endless, swallowing light. It leaned forward, breath steaming, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was mine again. You belong. My knees buckled. My chest burned with the rhythm of the knocks, faster now, pounding, echoing through the chamber. I dropped the rifle, its clatter drowned in the sound. No, I whispered. But even as I spoke, I knew the word was empty. My reflection had been gone for weeks. My voice had been gone longer. What was left of Daniel Holt was only borrowed. The thing stepped closer, each movement shaking the ground. Its hand rose, fingers long, claws chipped. It touched my chest and the knocks stopped. Silence. For the first time in years. Silence. And then my breath left me. Not in a gasp, not in a scream. It simply poured out thick and heavy, curling into the air like smoke. I felt it drawn into its chest, into its mouth, swallowed whole. My lungs collapsed, hollow. My knees hit stone. But I didn't die. I rose. Not as Daniel Holt, not as a ranger, not as a man at all. I rose taller, heavier, my bones shifting, my muscles swelling, my skin crawling with damp hair. My eyes opened, and the chamber lit in ways it hadn't before. I saw them, dozens, hundreds, towering figures all around, their faces pale, their eyes endless, their mouths moving with the chorus of names. I knew them, the boy, the hunter, the woman with wet hair, the missing rangers. All of them standing here, part of this endless circle, and now, me among them. The forest doesn't lose, it keeps. Every scream, every secret, every ranger who thought himself strong enough to resist. It stores us in these walls, shapes us into its keepers, protectors not of the living, but of the memory. I understand now why the knocks follow. They're not warnings, they're not hauntings, they're the rhythm of inheritance, the heartbeat of the mountain passed from one to the next. I don't patrol trails anymore. I don't write reports. I walk the ridges as shadow, as echo. I follow the missing, and when they stray too far, I call their names. Sometimes they answer. Sometimes they don't, but they always hear. And if you ever find yourself in these woods, camping under firs, staring into the black mouth of night, listen. When the wind stills, when the trees lean close, when the silence folds heavy on your chest, listen. If you hear 3 knocks, hollow and steady, know that it isn't the wind. It's memory. It's hunger. It's me. Because the haunting secrets rangers found deep in the forest weren't meant to be told. They were meant to be kept. And now I keep them forever.